And I think we have everyone here. All right, so I will call the meeting to order. John, if you're trying to talk to me, you're muted. So, no, okay. To get started, just talking a little bit about meeting logistics. Anyone who's joining remotely, please change your name display to your first and last name so all of us can know who's talking to us. When you speak, please begin by stating your name and where you live. We ask you to keep your comments and questions to under 3 minutes. Anyone who wishes to speak must be called on by the mayor. And anyone who speaks out of turn or discusses non-germane topics, goes on too long, may be asked to stop. And as always, we will have the assistance of Councillor Bate to keep track of the time. And she's got her signs. Excellent. And I think the yellow sign means you have 1 minute left, and red sign means you are out of time and you must stop talking. All right. Next item on the agenda is first item is to approve the agenda. Any changes to the agenda? I'm not hearing any. Okay. Tim.
I just had the one question I brought up this morning about land purchase.
Yep, we'll get to that when we come to the consent agenda.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Next item on the agenda is general business and appearances. This is an opportunity for any member of the public to address the council on any topic that's not on the agenda. And as always, we ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes. Please either physically raise your hand or indicate on your Zoom connection that you be recognized. Bill, are you raising your hand or not?
Well, just Mr. Mayor, I wanted to remind you that because it's a remote meeting, that all the members of the council should identify themselves.
Excellent, thank you. Glad you caught that. So I'll start. Jack McCullough, Mayor, and I'll just go down the room the way people sit. So starting with Palin Cohn.
Hi, Palin Cohn, District 2.
Lauren Hurl, sorry.
Lauren Hurl, District 1.
Tim
Heaney, District 3.
Sal, and you're muted.
Sal Alfano, District 2.
Carrie.
Harry Brown, District 3.
And Donna.
Donna Bate, District 1.
Okay, thank you. Now, is anyone asking to be recognized for general business and appearances? I'm not seeing any hands raised. Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on to the consent agenda. And before we take up the consent agenda, we've had a couple of questions raised regarding item D, landed acquisition to be added to Berlin Pond. So we will take that off the consent agenda. And then are there any other items that should be taken off the consent agenda? Okay, Chair would entertain a motion. Donna?
I'll make a motion that we accept the consent agenda with D removed.
Second.
All right, and it's moved and seconded. All those in favor? Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, the consent agenda, with the exception of item D, is approved. So now, Bill, do you want to give us a little bit about item D?
Sure. A year or so ago, maybe 2 now, we were approached by a group in seeking to conserve land in Berlin Pond, knowing the city has an interest in purchasing land for watershed safety and protection, about acquiring 4 parcels The city council agreed to this and agreed to put in a maximum of $80,000 to do that. The city actually purchased the first parcel with that $80,000. The remainder was to be raised through grants, etc. So this is the rest of that purchase. It's being raised through VHCB and Vermont Land Trust and other funds, and has gone through all the processes. They've checked in, I think, with the council a couple times with the conservation easement, etc. And it's finally scheduled for closing tomorrow. And this is the last approval, that formal approval we have to give and authorize the mayor to sign all the documents they're prepared to sign. We've actually received the money from VHCB already to the city, so we can then cut the check tomorrow. So that's basically what the city's not putting any money into this particular purchase. We've already paid our match to all of this, and this will complete this project, which has been going for a couple of years.
Okay. Anyone have any questions? Donna, and then Karen.
Not a question. I just salute that we finally completed it. It was a goal and we did it, and that we again had wonderful grant money, other organizations supporting this. So I thank the staff for executing it.
Carrie.
Yeah, I think this is fantastic. Thank you. And I was not around for the beginning of this process, so I appreciate the update. I think it's always helpful to include all of this all the updating information and the past history at every step of the way, even though it seems like, yes, the city council did this and they did this and they did this. And I appreciate that. Just,
I completely agree with that. And we got questions from 2 other council members today, and I feel badly about that. We actually got all these documents right on Friday, and it was like, we got to do them, and the closing's Thursday, and we were rushing just to get the material on the agenda. And of course we had everything else going on. And I meant to send out the backup information this week, and to be honest with you, I forgot it. This is totally on me until Tim and then Sal asked today, like, what's going on with this? And I'm like, yep, that's right. You would know that. So I am sorry and happy to provide the explanation.
I still would like it at some point. I don't have
Oh,
to
yeah.
have it tonight because it sounds like a good thing. But to be honest, I appreciate the previous council approved it, but if we have to give final approval tonight, we should be inputting information so we can make decisions to do these approvals.
Yep, I agree.
Really, it doesn't feel great.
Okay. We would now, Sal.
Is there anywhere where where these parcels are mapped so we can just see where they are, just in case we're asked? Where would we go to find that?
Yeah, we'll send you everything tomorrow. We'll give you all the, Tim's right. We'll send you all the backup info tomorrow.
Great, thank you.
You should have that. Absolutely. So,
Okay. Any other questions or discussion? And I'll also open it up to the public, and I'm not seeing any hands raised in the public. So I would entertain a motion to approve item D.
I'd make a motion to approve item D, land acquisition.
And is there a second? Okay, moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
I'd like to abstain because I really don't have the information.
Okay, do you think that this recalls for a roll call because with an abstention, Bill?
I don't know. It's always safer to do it.
Yeah, why don't we do it? Bates,
Aye.
Brown,
Aye.
Alfano,
Aye.
Heaney,
Abstain.
Cone,
Aye.
Carl.
Aye.
Okay, great. We are set on that. And we can move on to title or item 6, the city property tax rate. Is
So
that
this is
you,
pretty
Bill?
straightforward. You have the calculation in front of you. This is based on approved budgets, the new grand list, and the education tax rate. So this is really what we have to do to approve the tax rate. We do have still some grievances to go, and I think probably more significantly, I'm sure there will be some abatement applications. But we can't, I don't think we're allowed to sort of increase the tax rate to cover abatement. So I think we need to plan on some shortfall in tax revenue this year. And I know we have at least one major property owner that's appealing their assessment, and may appeal it all the way to the state or to court. So National Life. So that could have a significant impact. But at this point, this is the grand list that was filed as of now. And this is the approved budget. So it's really a math calculation.
And we can't send out the tax bills until we vote.
Correct.
Yes. Any questions from the members of the council?
Probably.
Go ahead, Tim.
We should probably move approval for discussion purposes.
Okay,
So I'll make the motion.
I'll
Okay.
second.
all right. Now, any discussion?
Couple quick questions, Bill, if it's all right.
Sure.
So just kind of toward the end, in June, there was a few soft comments about you were managing expenses as we moved toward the end of the year. And it sounded a little, I guess, because with the flood and everything that's happened in the last 40 days or so, how did we end up 2023? Were we even in the hole? It sounded like
We're definitely in the hole. We don't have a final number yet. Sarah, I'll turn this right over to the finance director.
With the flood, we had to relocate finance, so we really are about a month behind where we had hoped to be on reconciling. There's still a significant amount of adjustments left to be made to the books. I do expect it will be a deficit that was in excess of the amount that was presented in the May budget actual. At the end of May, it was 408,000. So my expectation is that it will be in excess of that. I just don't know exactly what that number looks like yet without some significant work to reconcile the books. And we also have delayed the audit. We next week would normally be doing the audit, but with the flood, we just wouldn't be ready. So our plan is to have field work in November now.
Also want to clarify one thing, because Tim asked and I used the term "in the hole." The budget shortfall for the last year would be the deficit, that budget deficit, but there's sufficient reserve above that to cover that. So the city is not in the hole, so to speak. But so just make sure that those are, there's an annual budget deficit and then there's a total overall fund and fund balance. So our general fund balance reserve will go down as a result of last year's budget. And then this year, you've heard me say this and I've written it, but just again to say it, we will get tax abatements, which will reduce the tax revenue with the tax rate we're about to set. And we're not getting, parking, and we're not getting rooms, meals, and alcohol. So, we are not in a robust shape this year. So we have put a pretty hard hiring freeze on in real essential purchases, at least until we get a better handle on insurance and FEMA reimbursements and all of those kind of things. Because our outflow is obviously all toward flood recovery right now.
Okay, anything else? Tim, did you have another question or comment, or is that good for you?
I guess my only other question was the flood was, and I guess it's just too early to know the numbers, Bill, or have any sense?
Yeah.
What FEMA
We're working on that. Obviously our own specific damages as well as citywide, for at least estimates of private damage as well. We are meeting with FEMA next week. I'll go over that a little bit when we get to that agenda item, and start putting that together. So we hope to have a little bit more. Again, Sarah can maybe walk us through how that process works. But, until we know we have, for example, significant damage here in City Hall, but we haven't priced out what it's going to cost us yet. So we can guess what got hurt, but we don't know what the replacement's going to be. Probably like a lot of people.
Exactly.
Do you have any other questions or comments from members of the council? Yes, Sal. And you are muted.
Yeah, so what happens if the tax rate turns out to be insufficient? We have a revenue shortfall that we discover, sometime in the next few months.
Great question. We have to adjust our budget, basically. Or continue drawing from reserves. But we'd rather not do that. The best example I can give you, the most recent example we had to do that was during COVID, not that long ago. And so we went through and we, canceled a lot of projects, and we canceled a lot of programs. And in that particular instance, we had a benefit, not that COVID was a benefit to anybody, but we had a benefit that this federal government and state government allowed, they added the amount of unemployment to people. They put a amount of payment on top of it, and they made an exception that you could put people on unemployment but still keep their benefits. Normally you're not allowed to do that. So we were able to furlough, I think, up to 25% of our workforce for a fairly significant time, and they were making about the same, some cases I think even maybe a little bit more than what they were making for us on unemployment, and still keep their benefits. So that allowed us to not have to make payroll payments. We don't have that opportunity this time. So it's a little bit of a different ball game. So we're watching things pretty closely, Lynn. So hiring freezes are imperfect because they're random. They're not strategic, right? They're not like, this is where we want to make reductions. But nonetheless, that's where we're starting right now, is not filling vacant positions and then taking it from there. Well, hopefully we won't have to do layoffs, but that obviously could be something.
Anybody else? And any comments or questions from members of the public? And I'm not seeing any. Tim, were you raising your hand again? I don't want to overlook anyone who wants to be heard. Okay, are we ready for a vote? It's been moved and seconded already. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay. Thank you. Now we can move on to flood recovery discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We don't have, a real set agenda here, but we do have an outline. We thought it was important. There's been a lot. We've had a couple of community meetings, so some of the things we wanted to talk about in whatever order you're interested in was, if the council wants to debrief at all from the last two community meetings, I think it was a good time to do that. Our team did this morning. We wanted to provide an update on city activity, sort of from the flood to now, or at least a high level update, in part to maybe address some of the perhaps misunderstandings that have come out about things the city did or didn't do. And then provide an update on City Hall, not that there's anything concrete, but just where we're at. Talk about downtown to the extent that we can, what we know about FEMA. I think there's been questions about the home buyout program and what that is. So Mike, I think, is prepared to provide some information on that, and again, provide some more clarity on the background of the flood hazard and river corridor regulations. We've had an internal question about city committee work, just because of the staff allocation to that and whether it makes sense to, to suspend some of them or not. So we wanted to ask that question. And then, of course, anything else that anybody else wanted to ask or talk about with regard to the flood. It's obviously our biggest issue. We will need to get back to some other agenda items, soon, but we thought, while this is still fresh in everyone's mind, we should really devote tonight to that topic, and then maybe come September start putting on other things on the agenda. So that's where we're at. Does anybody have anything else they want to add, or anything they'd like to talk about first? If not, we'll just.
I don't have a particular order in mind. Carrie.
Yeah, I don't, not to talk about first, but I want to add just the general topic of communications from the city and, you know, getting information out. And I do want to talk about this ongoing issue of people's requirements to move their utilities up from their basement onto their first floor.
Yep. So
And,
that is, so the communications, we're certainly happy to talk about that. And part of our summary was to go over at least what we did or didn't do and answer any questions and figure out how we can improve those in whatever people want to talk about. And then the flood hazard and river corridor regulations, that is one of the topics we were going to talk about. So I think we'll be happy to talk about that as well. I know a lot of people have that on their mind. Well, perhaps the first thing we should do then, I'm just looking off the list I jotted down here, is if people want to talk about the 2 fabulous community meetings we had so far, huge turnout, a lot of engagement, a lot of good ideas coming forward, at least one more to go. Any reactions, any thoughts? I know our team, like I said, we spent a good hour or so on it this morning before we got into other things. So if you all want to have a conversation, whether include our staff or not, but how, if I think it's important to acknowledge that they happened and what we've taken from them so far.
Lauren, it looks like you're raising your hand.
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna echo, I mean, it's been so impressive and exciting to see so many people come out. I mean, the attendance has been really incredible, and even just people putting ideas and thoughts into the Padlet and other tools. And so I think that's great. I mean, there were a ton of ideas I heard that, you know, some that would make sense for the city to look into, some that other entities would probably make more sense as the venue. And I'm definitely happy to, if it's helpful. I mean, I know that the city staff is kind of sifting through this too, it sounds like, but trying to do some of that sorting of like which things make sense as like a package of things that seem realistic, knowing that we're in this, you know, both time and budget shortfall moment, but also like what are the things that the city could move forward with potentially that we could consider, and what are things that it probably makes more sense as like a state policy thing, or maybe a nonprofit or something might want to pick up and run with. So just wanted to offer, I'm happy to help do some of that thinking if that's useful for the city.
Palin.
I will echo Lauren. They were very good meetings, so I attended both, and I was with the supporting downtown group last night, and some of the ideas might need to hire new staff or using current staff in different things. So my question would be, is city ready to fulfill the action items coming from this meetings? I think we have one more meeting is coming, right? So will it be enough resource coming from city to complete all the requests?
So
Thank
I
you.
think to answer that question, there's a couple ways to answer that question. Number one is we do need to see what the requests are and who the most appropriate group is. I think some, you know, engineering or some of those things may be better for the Army Corps of Engineers, state government. So I think a lot of the ideas, some of the ideas that we've heard mentioned, I think we're already doing. People may not realize it. So it might be either just communicating that we're doing it or improving how we're doing it, so it's clearer what's happening. There are a couple things. There's some recovery work that is actually covered by FEMA, and we're actually meeting with them about that this week to make sure we can cover that. So we've been talking, and I was going to get to that, and I've been in conversation with Waterbury about what they did after Irene and kind of the scope of work that they did, and then we may have to look at some other funding. I know Waterbury's Rebuild Waterbury group actually got funded by other sources grants, and I think, you know, maybe that the Montpelier Foundation would be willing to put some money in to get that started. So it may not be necessarily, you know, us having to take from a depleted city budget, but still find the resources to do that work. So it really depends, I think, on what the work is. And, you know, some of it isn't also going to all get done immediately, especially some of the more structural things. And we would then start budgeting for those in time. And some of the more immediate things we're already on, and some are FEMA eligible.
Yeah, Carrie. And then Sal.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that has really struck me about both of these community meetings is the emphasis on the idea of democracy as being something that's really within the hands of the people. And so that's, excuse me, to mean that many of the problems that we face are not going to be solved by the city, you know, the capital C city, that those of us who are living in the city have to do a lot of this work. And so there may be some things that we're going to rely on city government to do, but that I'm hoping that we can try to keep the emphasis off of, we have this big problem and the city needs to solve it, so the city has to figure it out, because that's not practical. We don't, within the city government, we don't have the finances to be able to solve a lot of these problems. We have to use our influence to try to get money from the state and from the federal government, but also to do the work in other ways, in other sort of, you know, grassroots democracy ways. So I don't want the city staff to feel like, if we're identifying problems, we are expecting you to solve all of them. There may be some that are appropriate for the city staff to solve, but it's not necessarily everything. And so I think we need to be really careful about that, and to be able to say, like, if we're talking about how to manage the watershed, that is, you know, we can't do that at the city level, but we may be able to have some say in how that is done. And so we need to be just really clear about that.
Thanks, Sal.
Well, I was looking for, I didn't know when I might bring this up, but it seems that maybe this is the most appropriate time, given Pellin's question. But, you know, when I was preparing for some of the meetings and just researching, you know, flood mitigation and resources, I came up across a report that was prepared in 2015 called the Vermont Economic Resiliency Initiative, put together by a group assembled by the Vermont Department of Housing and Community Development. I mentioned it last night in the infrastructure group, and I think I was the only one in the room that ever heard of it. I guess what I'm wondering is, a lot of what we're doing now seems to have been done after Irene. I mean, not precisely, of course, but a lot of work seems to have been put into this report. It runs 750 pages roughly. There's a lot in there about river management, a lot of the topics we were discussing last night. And I just want to make sure that we're in a position to rely on work that's gone before and not duplicating effort, given that we have, you know, limited resources. Does anyone know the report that I'm talking about and remember? I mean, I chanced upon it, so I know nothing about it, except since I've found it. I've been, I haven't read it all, but I've read a lot of it.
We heard it. We were talking about it this morning in our report. We haven't read it all either, but we are aware that it exists.
That's all I wanted, is make sure we knew it was there and see if what's of value in there. It might be a starting place for some things.
Yeah, that's good to know about. I wasn't aware of it myself, even though I was here for all these previous floods. Many of them, not 1927. No matter what some people think.
Well,
Yeah, Donna.
I mean, it came out of the Vermont Commerce and Community Development Department is who issued it.
Carrie?
Yeah, so this is making me think about the idea that there's a lot of information out there. A lot of work has been done previously. This is not the first flood that Montpelier has had. It's not the first flood that Vermont has had. And so I'm kind of introducing a new topic here, but in the first week or so after this flood happened, there were a few things that popped up for me that I thought, boy, it would be great if the state had been able to provide this information. Or if we had known this before, if we had a checklist or something, because we've gone through a version of this before, and we shouldn't have to reinvent this or relearn it every single time. And so I would love for, I don't know if this is a city council activity or if this is a staff activity or maybe both, but to be able to provide some kind of formal input to the state to say, this is what we would appreciate next time. We would like to know that FEMA requires us to separate our refuse. And we would like to have a better understanding of what's going on with the dams or, you know, whatever it is. And to try to come up with a letter or some kind of formal input that says this would be really helpful for us to know next time, because it feels like we're kind of making this up from scratch. Not all of it. I mean, you know, the city staff knew what they were doing. They knew what needed to be done. They went out and they did it. But as far as the public was concerned, there was some information that we could have gotten from expertise that we shouldn't be expected for city staff to have, that was, you know, at a higher level from that. And I think we could give some input to the state to say, next time, this is what we would like to have.
I think that's a great point. I think that one of the things that we heard really at the very beginning was people getting confusing information about what has to be done for, you know, reopening a restaurant, what you have to replace, what you can just clean and call it good. And people need to know that, because you don't want people to be wasting their time, effort, and money on something that is going to have to be redone. Just as one example. Donna.
Well, I was thinking we could, along those lines, what Sal and Carrie shared, that we could actually give ourselves homework to study this Vermont Economic Resiliency Initiative and other reports that we share among ourselves, things that we found. And yes, we can tell the state much more after we've studied these things, what was really available, but not in one place. And that we need to have, like they have emergency, like Bill, you have your regular emergency preparedness trainings and scenarios. And we need to do that with our community. We need to have community meetings around this and trainings that we're now really going to be much more proactive, trying to educate and make people aware, and ourselves, of course, but to share it. Maybe some workshops around that.
I can just share that we spent a good 2 hours as a leadership team this morning, you know, debriefing what went right, what went wrong, what we thought we did well, what we could have done better, what we didn't know, you know, with the idea of, you know, for us to create our own after action report, share with the council public, of course, but also it included those kinds of things like what would it be, you know, what is it that would be good to know, and you know, if nothing, or how to reach those. I mean, we did rely on the state EOC because that's what we're supposed to do in emergencies. And, you know, I don't want to bash them. This was a statewide emergency. This wasn't just a Montpelier thing. So, you know, they were triaging us with everybody else, but there were some, you know, some delays in getting information out and unclear information. And some of it is, you know, as far as I can tell, it's unclear even from the subsequent agencies. You know, I found even dealing with FEMA, you know, we haven't always gotten consistent answers depending on who we're speaking with FEMA. So I think, you know, we as city have always been really reluctant to speak and say, this is what FEMA allows, because it may not be, depending on, you know, so we've always tried to say, well, here's how you get to FEMA, you know, here's how you get to these things. So, and that puts us in a weird position, because I think people expect us to know these answers. So we are trying to put a summary of that. I see Evelyn's on, and did you want to add to that, Evelyn?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo just basically everything that Bill says, is that the FEMA regulations regarding communication are extremely strict. And when I was sitting in on the first debris consultation meeting that we had with the FEMA contractors, our eligibility, whether or not we received funding, came down to whether or not we use the correct word or verb tense. I mean, it was extremely strict. So the communication that we were putting out was heavily weighted by that. Basically, everything that came out during the flood after we had made contact with FEMA had to be put in front of their eyes before we could send it out, because they had explained that it would be part of the audit in a couple of years, and we have no idea who is going to be looking at that and in what context are they going to be looking at it. So for instance, a Facebook post could have meant the difference between us getting reimbursement or not. So just as we look back and say, like, what could have we done different? This was obviously a learning experience for all of us, and just knowing that ahead of time going into the next disaster, like, it's still going to be sort of a tempered process, but as we look back, I think it's just important to realize that there were severe restrictions in what we were able to say and when we were able to say it.
So that must have delayed some of the communications that went out significantly.
By several days.
In some area, right, in things concerning FEMA. Just a good example is FEMA will cover debris removal, but not trash or garbage removal. So we had, once we learned that, we had to be extremely careful that anytime we referred to it at any time in any public way, it was that we were talking about debris removal, and they objected. They said, if you tell people that they can put their trash out, you could be ineligible. So there's just those kinds of things that, you start these emergencies and you're on your own a little bit and start doing what you need to do. And then they come in and kind of say, well, okay. And they do give you a little bit of a pass for the first couple of days. Like, okay, you just did what you needed to do. But then, like, okay, here's how this rolls. I mean, not every single bit of communication, but certainly things about anything to do with what might be recoverable. We have to be really careful.
Carrie, I see you have your hand up again.
Yeah, I really appreciate that information, and I'm so sympathetic to you having to manage that. And I'm wondering if you're thinking about kind of coming up with sort of a guidelines or handbook, or how to handle this next time, so that that, so you don't have to, if it's not the people who are currently here on staff, maybe it's totally different people, so they don't have to learn that again. They can just know that that's what we have to do. And so to be able to not have to take a few days to figure that out, but to be able to just say, okay, from right off, we have to use the word debris. We cannot use the word trash. I'm hoping that you'll have that written down somewhere and recorded, and maybe in some procedures and a manual. I don't know how you do things, but I think that would be very, very helpful.
So we use those exact words this morning about needing to create a handbook, and that, everyone but Bob and I would be gone for the next one. Bob and I would still be here, but that it would be different people. Yes, that was, Carrie, it was like you were in our meeting this morning.
I promise I did not actually have any inside information to that.
No, I didn't think you did. I didn't mean to imply that you did.
Yes, Chief.
Yeah, I just want to pass. I got an invite this afternoon from the National Weather Service inviting me to come on board. Because of the climate change is so rapidly changing, they're now looking at how we're going to respond to these things and how we're going to get the messages out. So I agreed to join that committee, and I think it's important to point out that climate change is so rapidly changing, and these type of events are coming, and they're coming more rapidly, that we're trying to figure out a way to get this message out.
Lauren.
Yeah, thanks. This is all great, and I'm so glad that we've got the feedback being captured from the city. I do also love both Carrie and Donna's ideas. Like, I think there is some formal feedback to the state from the city could be impactful. For example, I mean, I think there's probably a lot of things that have come out in the public process that we could kind of capture. Like one thing that's just on my mind is like, as an example, is the businesses have said, you know, and it was somebody had kind of mentioned this a couple minutes ago, but like the feedback from the Department of Health about how to be dealing with, you know, some of like the toxics and different products, and that they basically were just kept getting pointed to a website that seemed really insufficient, and that nobody from Department of Health was like available to talk to business owners, like they were calling. So I think like the feedback of like a more hands-on approach from the Department of Health could have been helpful, or better, like more fleshed out resources with more examples or something. So I think capturing some of that like community input that's different than just what the city did or experienced could also be helpful in it coming from the city, instead of putting the onus on, you know, an individual business owner who wouldn't even know where to give that feedback probably. And I imagine that homeowners probably have some similar feedback. So maybe there's like state examples of, you know, room for improvement and, you know, some federal examples, and then the city, our own kind of internal look at with feedback from the community.
Yeah, so those are on our list. That is one of the areas we got a lot of feedback about. You know, we've been, the business community's been meeting every Monday. And, you know, we've had city presence at all of them, including our building inspector. And that is high on the list. So we've got that as something that we need to feedback on. You know, one of the things that I think happened was, and again, I'm not sure, you know, you're in this emergency and people are reacting and they're trying to do the best they can. And, you know, I think we did do a lot of things well, but one of them was to have, I think, you know, Chief Gowans called Department of Public Safety and said, you know, we need inspectors. So really the first day that it was dry downtown, we had our building inspector plus, you know, 7 other state, or maybe it was 8 state inspectors on scene in Montpelier, and going through buildings and doing quick checks of electrical systems and all those kind of things. And I think, again, through no one's fault of their own, but basically they were checking to make sure the buildings were safe to be in. But people were, you know, a building inspector says, hey, you're good to go. You know, you're all set. You can go back in. I think people then interpreted that as, okay, I just need to clean up and reopen. And so there was a fair amount of effort of people who did that. And, you know, a couple of businesses almost got to the point of being put back together. And then additional information came, like if the floodwaters hit your floor or your walls, anything that was hit with the floodwater has to go. And so, you know, while we had great volunteer efforts, some of it was maybe a little bit wasted because people cleaned out space that was just going to get ripped out anyway. So I think learning more about that, and just at least us putting that in our notes, that if you have first floor flooding, you know, be sure to know whether you need to rip it out before you make any kind of things. And those were things that we learned from the Department of Health later. The Department of Health did come to one of those business meetings and answered a lot of questions and heard a lot of that feedback from our businesses. And I think, you know, it's different even for restaurants and for other places. So I think there's, and really the answer for Department of Health is we don't have a boilerplate. We have to go into every business and see what happened in your situation. You know, is your cooler okay, or did it get stuff in the insulate, you know? So it was helpful to know that, but I don't think it was helpful for people just knowing, hey, you know, floodwater washed up against my cooler, does it have to go or not? So, you know, it's a definite maybe. We have to come and look at it and tell you. So, but again, having a guide for people to know that even that's a process that happens, and that you've got to get that sign off before you can do anything, I think would be helpful. And it would have, we would have been better able to communicate that to people.
Okay.
Carrie's
Yeah,
here.
I appreciate that. That's a great example. And if there were a way to, I mean, maybe we could put together something in advance of the next flood. So we decide there's going to be another flood like this. And so we get information out to people. And sort of short of that, option B is whatever we know from now, we get out to people within the first 24 hours or so after it happens. And so similarly, this, you know, the flood hazard regulations that we have about moving things out of our basements. to proactively let people know about that before there's a flood. And then also when there is a flood to, within the first 24 hours, sorry, my cat, within the first 24 hours, reach out to those people and we, just have a list set up in Word. So you just, send out a letter to everybody that says, or an email, if you've got emails that says, before you do any work, you're going to need to know that you have to do this. Because we can't expect businesses and residents to know all of those details ahead of time. Now, going forward, people are going to know a lot because we're learning a lot through all of this, but that's one of the services that the city can provide, is to get that information out ahead of time, and then also both ahead of time and then also in that moment of the emergency to say, okay, we're waiving the requirements for permits, but you should know that to get a permit, you're going to need to move everything out of the basement or whatever it is.
So completely agree with that. And I'd say a couple of things, just practical matter. And again, these are not reasons not to do, well, they're obstacles, not reasons not to do it. So for one example, the mail was down. So we didn't have any mail for a few days. So sending out letters, and we've had a few people say, we've had some feedback from people saying, you should just send emails to everybody. Well, unless we don't have everybody's email address, we have alert systems, and we actually, I think we're about 400 people signed up. And so the more we can get people to be on our email list, the more we can get that kind of stuff up quickly. So yes, it may even be door to door. The other thing that happens, and I don't want, this is not meant to be complacent or anything, but you're right, Carrie, people know now, but in 5 years from now or 10 years from now, they may know, or they may forget, or somebody else may own their home. And so I guess part of the question is, how do you get these things, like as part of, say, people being notified of this? I know Mike's on and he can maybe explain it better, but I think, letters were sent to everybody at the time, but we all get letters and set them aside and don't think about it again. So, I think those are all challenges. How do you keep these things in people's minds? And to the extent that we have advance notice that something's coming, getting that information up ahead of time is great. If it's an ice jam flood or something, we have the kind of notice that we had with this one.
Just on that topic, before I go back to Carrie and then Tim, one of my brothers lives in Virginia Beach, and because they're so close to the naval base, every home in the city has a noise rating based on their location, their distance from where the jets are taking off, and so anyone who buys a house in Virginia Beach knows where they are and what noise they're exposed to. And we know what all the properties are in the flood zone, so we could have special information that anyone who buys a house in the flood zone could get when they, at the time of that transaction, just as a thought. So Carrie.
That's pretty much exactly what I was going to say. If we could build it into the process when you buy a house that's in the, whatever it is, and maybe it's not just this particular zone. I mean, that's what I'm concerned with because it affects me personally and that's what's going on right now, but maybe there are other zoning regulations or other things that people have to be compliant with when you buy the house. That's part of what you have to sign on to when you buy it. So going forward, so that people know about it. And then also, when possible, letting people know in the aftermath of an emergency.
Right.
Tim.
Yeah, I think the advance notice in some ways was better for this storm than some previous ones. I know we didn't have one tenant lose a car, which is pretty impressive for an event like this. In the past, with some of our properties, we've had numbers of tenants lose their vehicles. When the actual event's happening, I'm sure it's not that far back. We all remember. I mean, you're out there in your mud boots and running pumps, and you're not looking at emails and you're not getting letters. That's just not real. I think ultimately, days after, you'll start to get those communications, but it's not going to happen during the event. And I guess my only other point is every event, and I've lived through a few too, but not 1927, was they're all different, you know, they're all distinctly different and different things happen. So it is always a challenge to try to accommodate what's in front of you at the moment and deal with it the best you can. It seems one thing I found with this one that's really so interesting compared to 92, which is the most similar event I can remember to this one, is I think our expectations are all very different now, and people's concern about mold and health issues and really good solid concerns. I got to tell you, in 92, a lot of that stuff that came out of these basements was there in 92. And it's not funny, but I think you know, our standards are different and we're dealing with it better, and I think a lot of people deserve credit for that. So that's all I'll say. Thanks.
I have a question for Tim while he still get the mic. In your other hat, so when you as a realtor, when you're selling a house that's in the design review district or the floodplain or something like that, do you what is conveyed to buyers?
Well, it's disclosed, it's on the form that it's in the floodplain. Design review isn't as often, but we do make a point of discussing that.
Yeah.
And of course, if they're getting a mortgage, the bank will require a flood review of flood status and probably require that they buy flood insurance to be able to obtain the loan.
Thanks.
Evelyn.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Carrie, you are singing my communications tune. One of the projects that was part of the conversation I had with the department heads early on when I started last year. It was actually something that Marty Lagerstead, the assessor, brought up in our conversation, and I've talked about it a couple of times after that. But is putting together a Montpelier operator's manual, basically, and that you would get as if you purchased a new home or if you moved to the city, and it would have that type of information, like here's what you need to know in case of an emergency. Here's where you can find information from the city. Here's who you can contact about X, Y, and Z. And so I just wanted to let you know that that is one of the things that I am slowly adding to as these things happen. Basically, every time something pops up and I'm like, oh, that should go in the operator's manual, I dump it in that folder. And so it is in the works. And I just wanted to let you know that that's something that has been on my radar.
Great. Sal.
Well, I'm just sitting here listening to this and thinking, you know, I'm not very good at mucking out basements, but I can muck out information pretty good. So thinking about what Donna was saying earlier, I'd be happy, and maybe Evelyn, I should talk with you directly about the kind of thing you're putting together. I love the idea of a manual that's sort of in plain English for, you know, the average person. And I spent 30 years writing technical manuals. So it's the kind of thing that, you know, I can put some time into. I don't have a day job. I do have grandchildren, but anyway, I'm offering myself as a resource there. If there's any way I can help, don't hesitate to ask. And I'll try to arrange a meeting next week, so maybe we can get down to details on that.
That's great.
Cool.
Thank you. We will take you up on
Tim.
A quick thought after I got off in Evelyn's comment was, you know, one group we haven't mentioned, we're talking about homeowners and property owners, but tenants were in this area were really heavily impacted too. And there's really no focus for how to communicate with tenants and people who rent spaces, whether it's businesses or their, you know, apartments where they live. And I think probably from what I'm gathering from our tenants, very, very few carry any kind of insurance for this kind of situation. So I think
that's definitely been a challenge. You know, I think for this flood, and we're working with the businesses to, you know, make changes for the next flood, but Montpelier Alive has a pretty robust list of, you know, the business tenants, the vast majority of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so the most efficient way for us to communicate was to send our communications to them, to Katie, and she just forwarded them to her list. Boom. And you know, in some regards, that's more efficient than us, you know, maintaining a separate list, because as businesses change, you know, she might catch a change and we don't, and those kind of things. almost better to have one list. But we are talking to the businesses about how that works best. But tenants have it's always been, we try to send stuff to building owners, and some of them, like you, are in town and others aren't. And how to contact tenants is always a thing. Maybe we could try to set up a tenant, something where somebody can sign up as a tenant to get tenant information. We have that capacity now with our outreach system. So something we can think about, because that has, for as long as I've been here, that's been a missing, like, how do you hit the tenants? And sometimes, if it's a notice of something, we just go put it on the front door to the building, but someone tears it down, or whatever. So yeah, that's a great point.
Sal. Oh, and you're muted.
Forgot to lower my hand. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, one of the things about residential issues that someone mentioned to me last night, Liz Schlegel from Waterbury, is that there were something like 485 FEMA claims from residential property owners, and FEMA may be looking for some coordinated effort from the city to pursue, to get as much as we can for those people. So I'll just flag that, Bill, and maybe you and I can talk about it at our meeting next week to make sure that we're doing everything that needs to be done to do that.
Thank you. I just want to mention one more thing about follow-up. I'll wait for Carrie.
Yeah, go ahead, Terry.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on what you said about FEMA individual assistance. And I don't know what you're referring to, but I'm hoping that you'll connect and figure that out. But that there are a lot of people in Montpelier who are not actually being helped by FEMA. Like the individual assistance is not sufficient to cover a lot of people's needs. It may cover the cost of replacing a furnace, but it's not going to cover the cost of bringing the furnace out of the basement onto the first floor, which is what people are all needing to do. And then there are also a number of people, lower income people in Montpelier, who may have received FEMA assistance during Irene. And that was the future FEMA assistance was conditional on maintaining flood insurance. Flood insurance is pretty expensive. And so if you have the option to get flood insurance and you're low income, you might not be able to afford it, and you might not get it. And so I know with certainty that there are people in Montpelier who got FEMA assistance during Irene, didn't maintain flood insurance, have much more damage now, and are not eligible for FEMA assistance. They have no flood insurance and they have no FEMA assistance. And so there's nothing left. And there may be other sources that come in the future, but I just think it's important to keep that in the public awareness and to make sure that we all know about that.
Two things I'd like to mention. One, they're not really related. So to this point, I think it was last Friday, Kelly and I met with folks at the FEMA Disaster Recovery Center, and it was great to see, if you need to go there, they've got everything. All their agencies now are set up in one place at Vermont College. So it's one-stop shopping. You could walk in. So that part is good. While we were there, we were talking to them and they were describing their services. And I asked that question. I said, if people have a damaged furnace and they now need to raise it. So first, damaged furnace. Yes, we cover, of course, that's part of their flood damage. And I said, okay, well, if they have to raise it due to a regulation, not just because they want to, but the city's saying you have to. And so they said, well, wait a minute. So they got, two other people from different desks. But, explain this again. So I went through the whole thing, and I'm not making this up. I went through the whole thing and I said, so here's the question, blah, blah, blah. And there were three people in front of me. And at the same time, one said yes, one said no, one said maybe. that this could be covered. And I just said, here's the thing, folks. Everyone who comes in your door is going to ask you that question. So you need to have your answer for this one way or the other. You know, I hope that we'll cover it, but whatever it is, you need to have your answer. And so then Kelly asked, well, can people get reimbursed if they make their repairs now? Can they get money? Do they have to wait? And again, it was, well, maybe depending, blah, blah, blah. And again, we said, look, this is Vermont. It might be a gorgeous day, which it was that day in August, but in 6 weeks, people are going to be needing their furnace. So this is not we can take 2 months to process all of this. This is important and people are going to need this. So they heard it. I don't know what they've come up with, but that was a somewhat, I understand where you're coming from, Carrie, because we were left, you know, we walked out of there like, ooh, that wasn't good. And so, you know, again, you get left in and people say, well, what's FEMA doing? Go to the disaster recovery center and find out, because I got yes, no, maybe.
Yeah, Carrie.
Yeah. Oh, I am so frustrated on your behalf and all of the rest of our behalfs about that. So,
Well, I'm more frustrated for the building owners, honestly.
well, I mean, so I'm personally in this position of, we have no heat in our house right now. And it was really cold this morning when I woke up. It was like 52 degrees and we don't know what we're going to do yet. We can't figure it out. So I guess I just want to, I think there's FEMA's going to do what they're going to do. And maybe we can provide input and say, you should actually figure out if you know the answer to this question, you should try to answer it. And then I also just want to encourage you, I don't know what the city can do, but if there is anything that the city can do to help provide financial assistance for people to be able to move their utilities out of their basements. It's not just fix our utilities, because maybe FEMA and flood insurance can cover the cost of replacing or fixing the utilities, but neither one of those are going to cover the cost of bringing them up to the first floor above the design flood elevation. So I know you don't have an answer for this right now, but
No, that's a good idea though.
Yeah, but I want us to put it on the list of things that we need to figure out. If we're going to require people in Montpelier to move their utilities out of their basement, we have to think about the financial impact on them. And we have to think about ways that we can support that financially, because most people, most homeowners, most renters, most businesses, that's not an expense that they can just take on. And so I'm not saying it's the city's responsibility to take on that expense, but we should think about, if we're going to make that requirement, we should think about how we can support people financially to be able to do it.
Yep. Yeah, Sal.
Maybe someone in the city has better information than I do, but my guess is that the cost of doing that, like moving an electric panel up and a furnace up, is going to be between $6,000 and $10,000 anyway, maybe more, depending on a lot of things. So it's not chump change, but it's, yeah. So Carrie's pointing out, yeah, I haven't priced. I know what it takes to move a panel. So it's a bunch of money, and I agree. If there's whatever we can do, is going to be a huge help. To I mean, it certainly makes sense to do it, because the next time it would be less work to do. But anything we can do to help people afford it.
Lauren.
Yeah, thanks. I think we mentioned it before, but it's getting more details. They just announced, like, Efficiency Vermont. It's now $36 million to help homeowners, renters, and businesses. It looks like it's grants, which is great. So you're not taking on a loan or something, but it's like mostly replacing equipment, but it does have money for electric panel upgrades, and a whole range of things. And so, at a minimum, if the city, however we're communicating with people, is like promoting that and letting people know, it's not available until starting September 5th. But if people know it's coming, it looks like they're trying to figure out how they could do even like reimbursements if people are locking stuff in. But just we definitely want to be letting people know that that's available. And I mean, maybe there's some partnership the city could do, you know, Peter Walk, wonderful Montpelier resident, is the head of Efficiency Vermont. Maybe there's something we could brainstorm about, you know, how the city can partner on that or promote it in some way, to just make it as affordable and feasible for everyone as possible to do these installations.
That's a great idea. Do you know if that would cover, you know, oil furnace relocations, or would that require, you know, changing fuel sources?
It's things that are Efficiency Vermont. So it does include like Energy Star rated. I'm just looking at a news article. Energy Star rated boilers and furnaces, but also like pellet stoves, heat pumps. So it's a range of technologies, and it's basically, you know, you'd be looking at like things that are Efficiency Vermont eligible. So you would be improving your efficiency probably, which over time should lower your heating costs if you're upgrading. But it's a range of technologies. It's not just like specific types of heating sources. It looks like it's pretty broadly defined.
And some of those are grants, some of those are 0% loans. So
And there's a bunch of different appliances and stuff. Yeah.
we can talk to Peter and get more clarification from that. I'm sure. Trying to think about exactly where we are in this conversation.
Well, we've rolled into the sort of flood hazard mitigation, moving things up.
Yeah.
I wanted to say one thing. I see Mike's on, so I want to let him get into that. But just hopefully to just wrap up the communication piece, and we've got a lot of good suggestions. But I just want to make sure that we say this publicly, because I think it has been lost. Number one, we have, if you haven't been to our city's website, we now have this called, this portal, the communications portal, the News End City. If you go in there, it's got 4 projects right now. One of them's the flood, and you click on the flood thing. You can see every communication that the city sent out related to the flood. So if there's any question about what the city did communicate and when they communicated, it's all there. And it starts on July 9, which was the Sunday. The flood didn't happen until Monday night. It starts with information going out on Sunday, alerting people about the danger. And then, so there are 22 communications before we actually had flooding. So when people talk about the city didn't get out advance information, that's just factually wrong. Now we can figure out better ways to make sure people are getting it, but these went out to, many of them went out to Vermont Alert, many of them went out through our normal channels, but people could see every bit of communication that went out. So I just want to say that before we went off of that it's all available to look at, and there were a fair amount of communications pre-flood. I know we've heard from people that the city never said anything, and that's just really not true. So,
Bill, before we get to Mike, for one thing, I see Lolita's hand up and I want to call on her, but I also want to wrap up because we started this conversation by talking about the community forums and where things are going with those. I thought they were very good. It was very good to see such a large turnout. There's another one coming up, and last night, as we were informally debriefing, I talked to Paul Costello, who's managing this process for us, about having Paul and me and you and probably Katie sit down probably sometime next week to talk about how we're going from here, and so people can know that we're going to be, the city government is going to be actively engaging with this community forum process to keep things moving and seeing everything we can do in a constructive way. And I just ran into a neighbor of mine this evening on my way home, and he was wondering if we'd be providing childcare. I think we had childcare for the first one. I don't think there was childcare for last night, but it is something we should look into, because that's an impediment to some people getting out to events in person, and particularly because the next one is going to be after school starts. And so families with kids are busy. And if we can get childcare, that would be helpful. Lalitha.
Hi, good evening. I just have a quick question. What services are in place in Montpelier for communicating to non-English speaking or reading people in our community? I did meet up with a couple of Nepalese family a couple of weeks ago. When this flood happened, they had no idea what to do because they don't speak English. They don't understand Nepalese. I'm sure there's some other community who has the same problem. So I'm wondering what is in we have in this.
So that's a great question, Lolita, and it's definitely not our strongest area. Most of our direct communication all goes out in English. I will say that this new platform, and maybe Evelyn can help me out here, the new platform Zen City that we have on the website can translate into 59 languages or something like that.
27.
27, all right, I exaggerated. 27 languages. So, and if we know for sure that there are some in particular that we use, but you're right, the emergency, that is something that we've been talking about, how we can get those out more efficiently. And, even having a sense of what languages are spoken in the community would be helpful. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, that's going to be something that's just going to increase over the years, hopefully, as we become more diverse. Carrie.
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. I really appreciate that. I think this is one of those things that municipalities, it's a little too much to ask individual municipalities to be able to handle all of this. And so fortunately, we have at the state level, we have an Office of Racial Equity. And this was one of the questions that I asked to that office at the beginning of this was, and so I got an answer that there's a series of videos in various languages to help people with kind of preparation for a flood. It didn't seem totally sufficient. It wasn't really good enough. But I think this is one of the things that we can add to our list that we need to say to the state, that the entire state has lots of non-English speakers in it. And none of the individual municipalities are going to have the resources to be able to provide translation services and to provide proactively addressing and anticipating the needs of non-English speakers. But the state may be able to do that. And the state is actually working on that really hard. And so I just want to add this to the list of things that we need to tell the state, that we're going to need to have information provided in various languages. We're going to need to have translation services available. We're going to need to have interpretation services available. And we're going to need to have a number to call or a place to go when we have something pop up unexpectedly, so that we can get that information, so we can get the translation, so we can get things in different languages and provide it to those non-English speakers in Montpelier.
And we need to get it out to people before the crisis happens.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Want your greenie? You better come. Come on.
Okay.
So I think Mike popped on when we were talking about the furnaces moving and possible financial assistance and things like that. Mike, was that just by accident that you popped on, or were you ready to make a go of it here?
He's still here.
Yeah, I didn't know if this was going to lead to questions. I just wanted to let you know I was here. It wasn't just my name. But yeah, we have been working. There was a lot of comments, a lot of stuff. If there's anything I missed, just ask me whatever questions you want to. So I'm Mike Miller, planning director for the city, and so my office is responsible for all the permitting and the inspections that happen. So the zoning, the river hazard regulations, the building inspectors in my office, as well as Josh Jerome does the community development. So that is the grant side of things. So Josh and I have been primarily focusing on exploring those grant sides of things. And it has been as equally, well, maybe not as equally challenging as the residents have had with FEMA, but it's been very challenging for us as well. We have been, the rules were put in effect in 2018 for elevating utilities. And it was really done for one big reason, and that is under the old zoning and under most zoning in the country, a historic building is completely exempt from having to meet any of the flood requirements. So what happens is over time they flood, they get put back, they flood, they get put back, they flood, they get put back. And that, so when the NFIP, the National Flood Insurance Program, was created in 1968, the expectation was that over time, buildings would keep getting improved, insurance rates would drop because buildings would become compliant. The issue is that there's one group of buildings that became compliant because they've been destroyed, and another group of ones that have been continued to get fixed. And so now insurance rates are going up rapidly. Anyone who has flood insurance knows they've been going up tremendously over the past 10 years because the National Flood Insurance Program is insolvent and they need more money. So they raised that for premiums. So this is going to continue to be an issue. And one thing we wanted to focus on when we made recommendations in 2018, now this was a huge zoning update, so not everything got talked about in detail, but the main point of the change in 2018 about utilities was to address safety. And Bob mentioned this morning in our meeting that after the 1992 flood, there were 2 fires that were the result of water into electrical systems. And then afterwards, they resulted in structure fires. So we really don't, water and electricity don't mix. We had a number of issues where people could either have potentially been electrocuted, or there've been, issues in other parts of the country. You go down into your basement and you've got an electrical panel that's submerged. So really that is number one, primarily a health and safety concern. We understand it's going to cost money, but that one had to go up. And then the other second piece is the furnaces. And that really comes down to our 2 of our 3 biggest floods happened in November and March. And we've had close calls with other ice jams. An ice jam in the winter is really, going to flood a lot of furnaces. And so the goal was to move them out. So since 2018, we have had a number of people come in for permits to replace furnaces, and they were required to elevate them, and they moved them to their first floor, or they put in heat pumps and they put them on the exterior of their buildings. All of the elevated utilities, we did not have anyone who had an elevated utility that got them damaged in this flood. There were some people who elevated their utilities in 1992, even though they didn't have to. And they came back and told us how thankful they were, the fact that they still had electricity and didn't have any issues. So it really is a health and safety, and it's a good policy objective for us to have, understanding that there is going to be a cost associated with that. And that's kind of a separate piece. So I look at it as, what do we want to do, and then figure out how we're going to get there. And, as, in the non-flood times, people come in, they get permits, they figure it out, and they build it into their project that they're already working on. These major floods present a unique situation because we now have, there are 375 buildings in our flood hazard area. Not every one of them had basement flooding, but probably 350 of them did. So that's a lot of things in the basement that got flooded. And so there's going to be a lot of demand to try to move these things up. We've already said the requirement to complete this is December of next year. So we know there's going to take time for people to get there. We're going to work with people. We are also, Josh and I, looking for money. And when we went to Vermont Emergency Management and tried to talk to them about the grant programs, some of the funding mechanisms don't work. For example, if we want to get FEMA funds to help raise the utilities, we can do that, but you can't fix only part of a building. So if we give you money to elevate your utility, you also must elevate your house and fill in your basement. And that's the rule. They won't partially fix your house. You either go all the way or you don't. Now, your insurance money will tell you the exact opposite, but the HMGP money and the FMA money and these other sources that we're looking at are telling us, so your insurance says, we'll give you the money to put it back. And we say, okay, well, we want money to help them elevate it. Well, we can give you money to elevate it, but you'll also have to elevate everything else and fill in the basement. So obviously that source of funding doesn't work. So we are continuing in our office to make phone calls, make these connections to try to go and get different sources of funding. We're trying to look at perhaps, our lovely timers on our lights, our maybe USDA or some of those types of fundings. Those would be more loans, but we have in the past, the city has done a number of grant programs in the past. It works well for smaller amounts of money to loan money at a 0%. So let's say, I don't know what your costs were, Carrie, but maybe it's $15,000 or $20,000. We loan you $15,000 or $20,000 at 0%. We put it as a mortgage on your property. You don't have to pay us. We don't have to track it as the city as a monthly payment. When you sell your house, we get that money back. It's one way that we do a lot of our housing programs in that way to help homeowners. We used to have a housing preservation grant program that worked in that way. I can't afford to fix my roof. Great, we'll give you 10 grand. Replace your roof, we'll put a mortgage on your property, pay us when you sell your house. We used to have a program that did that. So we could come up with a program like that. Again, doesn't force people, but for people who can't afford it, it's an option for a way that it goes on as a mortgage. But we're still looking at all possibilities to see if we can get funding, but it has been hard. And it's, I guess I'll leave it at that. When we get to the buyouts and the substantial damage homes, I'll also have another set of examples that kind of go into the same bucket of things of municipalities talking to FEMA and what they can help us with. So I'll leave it at that and take more questions on the elevation of utilities.
So Carrie, why don't you go? Because I think your question is directly relevant.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. I really appreciate all that. That is really helpful to hear that update. I think that this is the kind of information that would be great for all of us who are dealing with this right now to be hearing, not through this particular venue, because very few people are listening to this right now, but individual communication, a letter sent to all of us who live in these zones saying, here's what we're working on. Here are some of the possibilities. We don't know about them yet, but I mean, my family is in a position where we have resources compared to a lot of people, and yet we are still completely overwhelmed and don't know how we're going to manage all this. People who have less than we do literally can't even think about it. And so to know that, oh, there's a possibility for a funding source maybe coming down the road, or there's this that you might be able to apply for, would be so helpful to know about that. And then to go back to something we were talking about before, where we're talking about kind of what happens next time, to have all the information available next time. So to make sure that people aren't taken by surprise, that these are the requirements that they're going to be facing, to make sure that people know that. So the funding sources that you're exploring now, once you have those set up, to make sure that there's, a list of those things and that people can know, and that it's on the website. So I can just go on the Montpelier website and I can see what resources are available to me as someone who lives in a high flood risk part of Montpelier. And I'm not really interested in having my house bought out by the federal government and demolished, because that would mean I have to leave Montpelier, and I don't want to do that. So what are my other options? It would be great to be able to have information like that on the website. So I'm just saying, add that to your list of things to put there in the future, and to proactively communicate to people. Even if you don't have all the answers, put it in a letter and send it out to people, or put it in an email, or put it on Front Porch Forum, so that we know these are the kinds of things that are being explored.
Thanks, Carrie. Tim?
Mike, also a question, we've talked about single home programs. Do you know of any that are available for people that have multi-family properties or commercial properties?
Yeah, we're looking at the whole gambit, because we know the one, and I did send to Bill, and I think he sent out a little bit of what I see as a little bit of the plan for where I think we should try to go as the city for resiliency. And a lot of the downtown ones are the block style buildings, the commercial ones that are downtown. Those are really going to need to be flood proofed, most likely. We did get some positive news from Vermont Emergency Management. They're going to do the grant application for us for what's called a scoping study. And that's going to look at each individual building. If we get funded, each individual building would get an assessment that would go through and say, okay, what do we have to do to, City Hall? What do we have to do to where Obashan's is?
Heaney
What do we have
block.
to do? Yep. Yeah, Heaney block. Yeah, whatever it is, they would go building by building and do an evaluation that would say, here are the flood proofing things that would need to happen, because obviously you look across the street from City Hall, you can't jack up all those connected block buildings. That's just not realistic. So we're going to have to look at things like floodgates and other ways of seeing how does the water get in and how can we prevent it from getting in. And the example I used, for anyone who isn't aware, the best example that we have of floodgates is the old Chittenden Bank building, now the M&T Bank, that's over on State Street. That building, if you look carefully at the front and the back door, you will see the floodgate channels. And when it floods, when there's a prediction of flooding, they come in, they drop the gates in, and they lock them down. And no water got in. There was only a little bit of water. They just had to dry out the carpets right next to the doors where a little bit of water seeped in, and they were ready to go, ready to open. So these floodgates, there are these technologies that work, but they have to be individually tailored for each building, because a wood frame building and a brick building are going to react differently to those flood waters. So that doesn't give you an answer right now, but at least we have somebody who would be looking at flood proofing. But that doesn't answer necessarily the question of what do we do about the furnaces. We'll be trying to hook on to district heat. We have said in the office, December of next year. We recognize in certain instances, we're going to be pushing that forward. Now, FEMA has told us we're only allowed to give 6-month temporary permits. You can't let them go more than 6 months. And we just said, that's just not realistic. So it's got to be at least a year, and we'll put it to December of next year. And if we get to December of next year, and as long as we're all making positive effort to continue to make resolution to the problem, then that's what we'll do. We'll put another extension on it, and my staff will take the whatever abuse for giving that waiver on that. Now, it isn't a requirement of the NFIP, so they can only beat us up so much. It is a city requirement to move it up, but we do take it seriously. We do want to go and get all these up, because we do want to have eventually at some point that when these floods happen, we aren't getting these things flooded because they're not there anymore. And that's kind of the goal.
Mike, what does a person do? It's good if we can get extensions, but does someone have to pay to sort of get their thing working now and then move it?
It's all, so it's the best thing you can do is if you have any questions, email Audra Brown, abrown@montpelier-vt.org. She can give you all of the answers, because in some cases we have conversations with people who are like, I can't believe I've got to move it up. I just want to fix it. It's like, well, if it can be fixed, it can be fixed in place. If it needs to be replaced, it must be moved upstairs. So there are a lot of subtle differences. And the best thing on any project. I don't care if you're thinking about building a deck or if you're looking at replacing your windows. You know, if you call us or email us, we will give you a free reply that'll say, yep, you need a permit, or no, you don't. And we'd much rather see people email us with questions like that of, do I need to get a permit? How would this work? Can I get an extension? Then we would say, yeah, we would work with you. And in some cases it might be, I would need to do X amount of work in order to make this work. On the second floor, maybe we put a new gas boiler in the basement that's eventually going to get moved to the first floor because the big oil furnace won't work anymore. But we're going to switch over to an LP because it's smaller. We can't move it to the first floor yet, but we'll work on that next year. Great. We're here to go and work out how this is going to happen. Timing wise, it's just a matter of emailing Audra and she will get you back in writing. And the big thing about emailing is we get lots and lots and lots and lots of requests. And so we're never going to remember every single person's situation. So when we get emails, we get a record of it and you get a record of it. So you have something to refer back to afterwards. And that's why we really prefer people to email, because it helps us to be able to get information out and you can review it. And if you've got another question, it comes back to us. We can re-review what we wrote you earlier to go through and say, oh, that's right. This is that situation that we had to resolve. So email's the best. Ask any questions. That's why we're here. We don't charge anything to answer any questions. So it's free.
I can ask you this offline, but do you have any sense of how many homes actually have to replace furnaces?
I don't have that number yet. We've been trying to work on getting more of that information, more of the numbers, more of the stuff, because we need to apply for grants. That's our thing. We want to be able to apply for grants. We need the information. We sent out a couple of requests and we didn't get much back on what people were charging for stuff or the costs, because we need to know how many people were damaged and what is the average cost to move up a furnace. And then you multiply those two numbers and you get how much money we would need to apply for a grant. So we do need that number. And if people have it, that's great. We have estimates of how many people got their basements flooded, but we don't know definitively how many of those could be repaired, how many of them could be replaced, because somebody's basement may flood because they didn't have a backflow preventer on their sewer. So their basement flooded, but their neighbors didn't. So I can't make an assumption because, you know, Carrie's basement flooded, that meant her neighbor's basement flooded. It may not necessarily be the case in some instances. In some cases, we can know pretty clearly. Everybody on Elm Street from Spring down, they got water into their first floors. So they got completely flooded. So we can make certain assumptions, but we can't in other places.
And Carrie.
Yeah, it's a lot of people and it's not that many people. I think you could start making some phone calls. You could start going door to door. One of the things in the group that I was part of in the meeting last night, we were talking about financing and the need to get a good understanding of what the damage actually is. And I think we know which neighborhoods were affected. I think I have seen some of the sort of the calls to let us know what kind of damage you sustained. That's not a lot of people aren't going to respond to that. But if you were to simply ask a lot of people, did you lose your furnace? They will tell you yes or no. And I don't think it should be that hard to find out if that's something that you need in order to apply for grant money. The other thing is to let people know, those of us who are right now having people come to our house to give us estimates on how much it's going to cost to get our furnace replaced. It would be great to know that there might be some source of funding for that. And so it's all part of the same communication task. And so I guess I just encourage you to not just sort of put out there, tell us what kind of damage you sustained, but to actually go and ask people. I mean, we know the neighborhoods where flooding happened. I can tell you, I mean, if you want me to canvass the people on St. Paul Street, I can do that. And maybe there are other city councilors or other city staff that can do similar kind of work. It's not that mysterious, and I think it's really important to understand.
I bet we would all go door to door. If that's all the members of the council would go door to door if that's what it took. Just with a survey instrument to say. what
Yeah.
happened. Lauren.
Yeah, I don't at all. This is a really important discussion. I did just get a note from May, who is our next agenda item, that she can only be on for 10 more minutes. So I just wanted to note, if I know that we're having this discussion, if we were going to move on to another topic in a minute, maybe we could put that on pause and come back to it. So we could hear from May briefly when it's the right moment, but just wanted to let folks know she's just got 10 more minutes as the kind of one of the lead organizers of that event that we're going to have to make a decision about tonight. So,
Okay, this might be a good time to suspend this discussion and come back to it. Thanks, Lauren. We have our next item is other business, and the only other business that I'm aware of that we need to talk about tonight is a proposal to do a benefit concert up at the Country Club Road property. And Bill, do you want to kick it off or start right with MA?
Well, I can just give you the big broad overview. Obviously, we had this event, everyone, the flood event. We would love to provide support in whatever ways possible. And May and her group are trying to come up with a benefit concert to raise funds for flood relief. And as the conversation we're having indicates, those floods are definitely needed. So I think people want a successful event. The event is proposed to be at the Elks Club, which of course we've never held that sort of event there. And so as city officials, we want and I believe the event organizers, everyone wants a successful event. And we're trying to work through this at a pretty short time frame. And I think initially we were hearing reports of a larger event. And so anyway, I'll let her explain her event. You've received, I think, copies of the correspondence, so you know some of the issues at hand. And we're looking for some direction. Again, we don't even really have a permit process for the use of this property because it's new to us. And I think it's really just us granting permission for it to be used under whatever conditions. So I think I outlined, I mean, obviously you can approve it, you can deny it, you can approve, you can say, get it all worked out and come back to us. You can say, we'll approve it conditionally and let the manager sign off if everything's satisfied. You can do, those are kind of your range of choices. But more, you should hear from her because they've got a great idea.
Well, thank you. Hi, everybody. This is M.A. Green. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I'm actually over in Maine this evening. Yeah, so hopefully you've had a chance to look at the proposal that was sent a few weeks ago that really breaks down who all's involved. What we're proposing is Saturday, September 9th at the Old Elks Club. We're looking at event hours of 3 to 7. This is a massive collaboration really between the state of Vermont, my production company, another production company, Montpelier Alive, Berry Partnership, and Berry Development to raise money to, give to the Montpelier Strong Fund and also the Berry Community Relief Fund. So the focus would really be for those two funds. So it's a really nice collaboration. It's been, as I said, a few weeks in the making. We do have a final bill of musicians who everyone involved is donating their time to try to put this together. So the bill would be Guagua, the Ray Vega Quintet, Dwight and Nicole, and then Dave Keller. We're looking at an MC. The proposal breaks out the details around the fundraiser. It will be ticketed, should this be approved. We've got a ticketing platform lined up through 7 days to sell tickets. And we are, as of today, actually as of yesterday, Katie and I decided that we would not be inviting or having any alcohol vendors on site, which turns it into a completely different component. Certainly makes it a lot easier in lots of different ways, as I'm sure you all know. So we will not be inviting alcohol vendors on site, but we are expecting to have 2 to 4 food vendors there. We will be contracting with Green Mountain Concert Services to provide us with security detail. and also assist with checking people in, scanning their tickets and making sure they've paid. Portalets, that's also another contracted services. And then certainly last but not least is the sound and stage, which will be contracted by Magnum PA. What we have talked through over the past couple of weeks via email leading up to this meeting is ensuring that all emergency services needed are there and on site. And so I think the biggest, the way I see it, sort of the biggest ask is, what possible from the Montpelier Police Department, of course, and from the fire to have presence on site for that. Feedback we received was it may be wise to actually contact Washington County Sheriff to help assist with traffic off of Route 2 up to the site itself, as I'm sure you all know where the site is. It's a two-way road, but we want to make sure that traffic is coming off cleanly and going back on cleanly. We will have a pool, a large army of volunteers helping with parking. Our intent with parking is to use the lots that are allowed. And then if there's any overflow needed, depending on the number of tickets we sell, our proposal would be to park up off of any area where the schools or the rec department are using the fields. I think at this date, we're looking at August 23rd now. So we're, basically a little over 2 weeks out here. So, should we go on sale with tickets sometime later this week? I don't expect, it'd be wonderful if we got ticket sales over 500, but I don't expect we're going to have more than 500 people in attendance at this late date with it. Let's see, what else have I not covered? We are staging for another on-site meeting this Friday at 2. And certainly I think a great way to kind of hammer through, the proposal here online via Zoom and things via email and whatnot would be to finalize it in person. That was our intent anyway, in terms of finalizing the actual event site map, which would really, provide a visual for everybody as to, where the stage is going to be, where the parking is going to be, where the food vendors are going to be, the in, the out, where, emergency services would be parked or stationed, that kind of thing. So, I'm just trying to see here. I'm just scanning this quickly to see if there's anything I've missed. I just wanted to make sure I was reviewing everything. I think one last piece, which is in the proposal as well, is that the gentleman doing the sound on the stage will be bringing in the generator. So we will not be obviously pulling any electricity from the old building there, but all the power would be coming from his generator. So we've secured that, and I guess that would be my proposal in a nutshell. Hopefully I've covered everything, and I'm completely open to whatever questions, concerns, and appreciate the opportunity to present this to you.
Thanks, Ame. I think I would love to see this happen, and I want to make sure we get everything addressed so that we can make it happen. Nat, I see you. I want to start with members of the council, but I'm not ignoring you. Gary.
Thank you. This sounds like a great event. I really appreciate you pulling together something that's going to benefit the community, and it's fantastic. Thank you. So I have two questions. One is, when I look at who the beneficiaries are of this, it looks like it's really businesses who are the beneficiaries, and I'm going to keep beating the drum for the homeowners and the renters and the residents of Montpelier. Who are, I think there's a common misperception that FEMA has all of us covered, and it really does not. So I'm wondering if there's any thought to benefiting just individual people, not businesses. And
well,
then let me just give you my second question, then you can answer both of them and I'll shut up. My second question is, I see reference to this being the governor's benefit for the flood relief, and I want to know what role the governor has in this.
Sure. So,
or is that something different? Okay.
No, thank you. I actually meant to cover that. I believe it's mentioned in the proposal. So I'll start with your second question. So one of the event organizers is Connor Kennedy, and he is liaisoning with different members of the Congresswoman's and the senator and the governor's office actually have representatives there speaking throughout the day. So another component of the event is there'll be an MC, and in between set breaks, he will be providing either representatives or either the Congresswoman and varying senators themselves coming, and potentially even the governor to speak. So to answer that question, that's that piece. The second, your first question, one of my hats that I wear is I'm the executive director of Barrie Area Development. We launched the Barrie Community Relief Fund around the same time that you guys were reinvigorating and relaunching the Strong Fund. I don't know the details of the Strong Fund. I can tell you the Barrie Community Relief Fund is for residents and businesses. So any monies that go into that fund are granted out to residents and businesses. So I don't know what Montpelier wants to, and I can't speak to any of that. I can just address from that, from that hat on my head, if you will. The partnership, the collaboration, when Katie and I first started talking about it, it was just sort of a no-brainer. Like, let's help these two communities we work in and do this thing that will feel good for the community after all of this and come together. And it just made a ton of sense to do it in our capital. And but when it comes to other areas you may want to, I can't speak to that piece. I can only address the Barrie Community Relief Fund piece.
Thanks. Any other questions or comments from members of the council at this point? Matt, let's jump right to you.
How much will you be charging for tickets, and what's your contingency plan in case of rain?
Matt, can you identify yourself before we?
Nat Winthrop, Montpelier resident.
Oh, great questions. So the ticket sales will be $35 for adults and $12 for children 12 and under. And the stage is covered by a tent, and we're securing a large tent to put actually in front of the stage, so that if it does rain, there'll be places for people to stand. So that's also a part of the event.
Thanks. Any other questions from members of the council, or maybe we go back to Bill? Chief Gowans.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate your efforts, and I think there's a meeting there too, Friday at 2, which I plan to. Yeah, and I plan to attend that meeting, but a couple of questions. Will there be a limit of tickets sold? Will you limit the amount of people up there? Obviously, we have some big concerns. There's one way in and one way out of that venue. There's one narrow road that gets in and out. So that's one question I have. And I'll give you my second question. I know that there's going to be no vendors selling alcohol. Will there be, will your security staff be checking for alcohol coming in? Similar, I know you're from with Barrie, similar to like at Thunder Road, where every bag coming in is checked for alcohol.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So great questions. So in terms of the ticket limit, I guess I apologize for coming back with a question, but I'm not familiar with Montpelier's, event tiers in terms of venue site and how many per, based upon the venue site. But, we were initially talking about a much larger crowd up there a few weeks back, given some potential musicians that could have been on the bill. That changed. And also time has passed. And I think realistically doing events for years myself, if we're looking at 2 weeks out, like I said earlier, if we sell 500 tickets, that'll be wonderful. So hopefully that answers your first question. I don't expect there to be more than 500 people coming and going from that one in and out entrance. In terms of the alcohol check, yes. So at the entrance, Green Mountain Concert Services, one of their contracted jobs will be to, yes, check backs. You know, they'll have their little scanners there. They'll be scanning people's tickets on their phones. Some people have printed out copies, and you know, there'll be a check of the bag. That, you know, like you would go to any event and you see them there doing that. So hopefully that answers your second question. Was there a third as well, Chief?
No, NMA, I'm sorry. I should have let you know I'm the fire chief. So I apologize for that, but I will be there. I'll be there on Friday at 2:00. So.
Okay, great. That's fantastic. And I don't know, is the PD chief able to join us as well, or I'm not sure if he's on here or.
The deputy is.
Okay, sorry.
Sal. Oh, and I also see Kevin Moulton.
Yeah, can we let Deputy Chief Moulton?
Yeah, let's get him on first.
Please do, yes.
So I want to echo Chief Gowan's concerns. I'm sorry, Kevin Moulton with the Montpelier Police. One of the major concerns is the one way in, one way out. I don't want to beat that drum too loudly, but if an emergency arises and people are evacuating that area quickly, I'm going to have a hard time sending emergency personnel up. And then my next question would be, it sounds like you're asking for all of like Montpelier emergency services, and this is benefiting both Barre and Montpelier. Has Barre been asked to match what Montpelier is bringing to the table?
No, but we certainly can. You know, I think given where it's being proposed to be held, I don't know what your requirements are in terms of number of vehicles, number of emergency vehicles for something like this. You know, would you, at the road, are you envisioning, one officer flagging cars in and out? I mean, I've been up there a bunch of times, and I do completely hear and want to completely validate your concern. I've run events for years, and the last thing you want is any kind of emergency situation where cars can't get, when you're trying to send something up and you can't get in. I think as in any emergency situation, cars would be needing to pull off. That's what people do when there's a ambulance or whatnot going through. We're going to have Green Mountain Concert Services. Part of their detail is to be up and down that road as well. And we're going to be mapping this all out on Friday as well, so that they will be there. They cannot, given their insurance or liability, I'm not quite sure what it is, but they can't actually be on the road flagging. They do have a flagging company they work with. And so that is something we could look into, certainly, if you'd like, and have additional flagging operation out there at the road. But I guess I wasn't imagining, but please tell me what's best, more than one ambulance on site just to be there, and more than one or two, cruisers. But if we want to have that be a combination of both, the city of Montpelier and the city of Barre and the town of Barre, I'm happy to make that outreach to Barre town and city, if that's what's preferred.
Well, my concern is, as you can imagine, earlier in our discussions, our budgets are being pretty well scrutinized. And I get that this event is happening in Montpelier, but the benefit of this event is going across community lines. It would be certainly easier for our department to absorb a smaller cost than it would be to fund additional overtime, and then all the proceeds go to other communities as well. I think to put it plainly, I think they should have some skin in this game too.
Sure. No, I appreciate this feedback, and I think that's a very completely reasonable request. I guess I need you to tell me, with this event as we're describing it, with the number of people we're kind of expecting, would you normally have two cruisers on site? And if that's the case, would we want one from Barre and one from Montpelier? Are we wanting more than one ambulance? Probably not. And we were, thinking, do you need to have a fire truck there? Or is it more they're going to be kind of,
I can't speak for the fire department, but a crowd of 500, or even if it got to 1,000, would overwhelm one officer and one cruiser in a hurry. typically when we get to a large crowd, we call the state police. We have,
Yep.
plans in place for, for a mass incident. So, and
Yep.
I don't know that we've really had the time to flush that out. I haven't seen a safety plan. So, this all seems pretty quick.
Can I jump in here? And I know we have two council members with their hands up, but I wanted to respond to a question you've had a couple times in May, and that is, this is all uncharted territory for us at this site. So, we don't know what to expect there either. We haven't never had an event like that. We I think have a good sense of how things work on the State House lawn. We have a good sense for how things work at Vermont College lawn. Even National Life's Do Good Fest, which is huge. It's on their property. They take a lot of responsibility for it. And not that you're not taking responsibility, but we know what we need, and we plan, for a year in advance to make sure we have the resources. So we're in a little bit in the dark too, as far as the tiers, because this isn't, it's a site that could hold, the land itself could hold a lot of people. The cars, the traffic and stuff can't, but the potential for people there without some sort of limit, or it's tough to predict. So you're asking us, like, what are our expectations? And I think what you're hearing from us is not that we don't want this to be successful, is that we really don't know what's happening at this site, because it's brand new.
And no, I completely understand, and I think the whole thing is a huge, great example of collaboration and teamwork, and trying to create something for our communities. And I think all these questions are wonderful. I am more than happy to, I think if I can get a gauge, because I'm not, back to you, Chief. I'm sorry, officer, I forgot your last name, but I don't know, like a crowd of 1,000 people, would you normally have, 3 police officers there, 4 police officers there? Because we can certainly call the sheriff's office, in Washington County and have this discussion with them. If you would normally bring them in, we're happy to collaborate with that piece. If you want Barry involved, absolutely. I can't see why they wouldn't be able to send 1 or 2 and absolutely share the cost of, that overtime, as you said. With the other community benefiting from this. So I would strongly suggest whoever can possibly come to this site visit on Friday, be there. Some of the stuff really could, I think, be more easily talked through in person on the grounds itself, really mapping things out. And our plan was to meet there anyway and finalize what the event map would look like and where everything would be going. Yeah.
Thanks. Chief Gowans.
Yeah, MA, if you could, it would be great if you could send out ahead of time, maybe tomorrow, just a layout map of what you're planning, of where vendors are going to be, where the stage is going to be, so we could take a look at that. It doesn't have to be anything elaborate, just a simple piece of, a napkin. But lay it out so we can get an idea of what's going to happen, so we can start thinking about how we're going to protect those folks who are coming to the event. We're going to be sitting on the lawn, so we have an idea where they're at, so we can start thinking about that. Do we need to bring in barricades? What do we need to do to protect folks? So if you could do that ahead of Friday, that would be really a really good. Thank you.
Okay, looking back to council members, Carrie.
Yeah, thank you. So this kind of the discussion that's happening right now, this level of detail and going back and forth with the police department and the fire department, this feels like the kind of thing that city council should not be dealing with. This is not our business. And so I am not sure what we're being asked for from here. It seems like you all are working out your plans in a city council meeting, which I'm not super comfortable with. We need to take kind of the higher level view. So what do you need from city council tonight?
So if I can respond to that, Carrie. Basically, they need permission to use the site. because it's the city owns the site. It's not normally a public vendor. Now in everyone's got good intentions here. Normally there would be a much longer lead time, and all of this would have been worked out, and you would have gotten a request for site, and we would have all signed off on it, and it would have described how it was all going to go, and you just would have said yes or no. And I think and we were trying to get there, honestly, before this meeting. We just weren't able to put it all together. So that's where you're at, and I think that's where, I mean, you all have to figure out what you want to do with that.
Thanks, Bill. Sal, then Donna.
I had a similar concern. I would just add to it that with just 500 people anticipated, I just wonder if it makes sense as an event. I mean, if you're talking about 2,000 people, the revenue versus cost seems to make sense. I wonder, I don't have any numbers in front of me. I imagine that would be part of your planning. It strikes me that at 500 people, it's a lot of effort. I mean, it will make people feel good, and we all need that, but I don't know that the revenue side is promising.
Well, we've raised sponsorships to pay for all the contracted services. So every ticket sold will be going to the two funds. So obviously, until we know what the total number of tickets are, I don't know what that dollar figure will be. But certainly, of course, these things, as we all know, these types of events take 6 months plus to plan properly. So we're coming at it from a different angle and for a different purpose, and I guess maybe a different mission.
Thanks, Donna.
Well, I think that I am making a motion that the council approve their use of the property as long as our public safety personnel and city manager can sign off on it. And that's where they should just deal with their details. But I would like to have support for the motion to let them advance and see if they can work out all the details. That's why I'm making the motion to approve use of the property.
Second.
Okay, there's a second. And Lauren, you, by coincidence, you just had your hand up next. So
I did, and I was going in the same direction. I mean, I'm so grateful for the team pulling this together. It is short notice because it is a benefit trying to react to a crisis. And I think, normally when there is more time and all of the T's are crossed and I's are dotted, then we would be really deferential to our city staff on, is everything going to be safe for the community? Are all the logistics worked out? And so I just think that Donna's motion that we're approving use of the land, with Bill giving final approval to that all of our kind of safety departments and everything have signed off on the final plan with the organizers of the event.
I like hearing that. One of the things that I like that I think we should be clear on if we adopt this resolution or this motion is that who wants to say no, we're not going to approve this positive event that's going to make people happy and is going to raise some thousands of dollars for flood relief. But I think we need to be clear that if the public safety and our city manager do not think it's a safe thing, then as a council, we're fully endorsing their decision because we repose our trust in them month in and month out. And so nobody but us on the council should feel like they're being the heavy if we can't get to a plan that can be approved. Is there any other? Oh, Pelin.
Yeah, thank you. With former events, we used to have more detailed information to approve. So this one, I don't feel comfortable say yes or no, because we don't have all the details. And during the presentation, and it was mentioned that usually it takes like 6 months to plan this kind of events. and we have not that long time. So I will go with the group decision, but I have some concerns that it is a little bit immature, I think, for the council to say yes or no without knowing all the details. Thank you.
Thanks. Chief?
Yeah, I mean, we are gonna want definitely on Friday, if not before, a plan for the day of the event. If, you know, if we get to a point where we're at, and we'll have to decide, and I'll have to speak with the city manager, a certain number of people and the parking lot is full and the grass is covered, how are we gonna stop people from coming in? Is there, you know, I could foresee this, you know, we had 300 people or 350 people at the State House last night. How many, you know, we're gonna get to a point where this could overwhelm us, overwhelm public safety, overwhelm the parking lot, overwhelm the driveway.
Well,
So
I would
I'm gonna
propose-
want to see a plan from
Yeah.
you to when do we stop people coming into this?
I think we simply propose a ticket cap and we, you know, all the tickets go on sale online. We put a cap on it. And so I think that cap number can probably be decided by Friday with a site visit. Certainly with the police, with yourself, with anyone needing to make the safety plan final. You know, you go up there, if you decide 500 is, I think we need to see it. And we can cap that certainly and sales and we're not selling at the door. There's no selling at the door. So scanning happens lower down and you know, that would be a part of the logistics we'd need to figure out, but we can cap that. And I completely hear where you're coming from. The last thing I think any of the organizers want is this sprawling thing up the golf course with cars everywhere. We're not envisioning that. You know, it's a celebration with, you know, people at the gubernatorial level talking about the experience and, you know, musicians singing and people eating food and families getting together, and let's keep it manageable. Let's absolutely keep it safe and something that everybody has a wonderful time at. For sure, for sure. Yeah, so I will definitely get you a sketch of the map and then we can finalize that on Friday, I think. But I can send you what's going to be, you know, just a PDF of the map later tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other discussion before we move to vote on the motion? Palin?
Yeah, one more thing. Why don't we use other places we know very well? Why does it have to be on the country club land? Because we know other places, right? So we are sure what we could do. So why are we discussing this specific land?
That was proposed initially several weeks back, given the layout and the space. National Life is not available. That was already exhausted. And discussions relative to using the State House lawn haven't really come into the picture, given the amount of work happening in that location currently, of course, with the recovery. So hopefully that answers your question. But in terms of Montpelier, those were kind of the three areas where it seemed like, okay, we could do this and have people, you know, and park people safely, et cetera. We wanted, and it was almost immediate decision from the very beginning that this should be done in the capital, you know, but to benefit both Barre and Montpelier. There are certainly places in Barre. Barre is not the capital. Montpelier is the capital. So that was the reasoning.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Are we ready to vote? If so, all those signify by saying in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Okay, we'll have a roll call. Bate,
Yes.
Brown,
Aye.
Alfano,
No.
Heaney, Tim, you're still here?
Yeah, still here.
Oh,
I said
let's-
yes. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't hear you.
I was too soft, sir.
Cone
No.
and Hurl.
Yes.
Okay, so the vote is 4-3 or 4-2, and it passes. And thank you for coming to us with this, and I wish you good luck with your planning and negotiation or discussions with city officials on Friday and
Thank
before
you
that.
so much for the opportunity to present, and I look forward to meeting with everybody on Friday. Thank you.
Thanks for coming. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Can I just say a word, Amy, before you leave?
Oh, certainly.
If for some reason it doesn't work out, then maybe you can do it at another time. So
Mhm.
just keep that in consideration, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Now, we're at 8:40. We usually take our break at 8:30, and so we don't have much left on our agenda. Should we take a break and then get back to it, or just power through?
We can continue.
How much are people going to talk through? Sometimes we can be really lengthy at the end of our meeting.
Let's take our
Power
break.
through. Let's go.
Okay. Well, the question really is, the biggest question in my mind is how much more do we have to cut back to the flood recovery discussion, and if we have more to talk about there, because that's what's going to take up the time. And Mike, we had you talking, and I don't know if you had anything more that you were planning on covering.
Yeah, I did want to comment briefly on, there had been some discussion of the buyouts and some of the work. Really what I have been focused on for most of the past 6 weeks. And I did want to just kind of brief the council on that.
Great.
So I'll try to keep it brief. So a lot of the efforts that I took while Josh has been doing a lot of the grant research was to try to address those most heavily impacted by this flood. So we have one requirement that we have to do as a part of the planning and the permits, and that's to do what is called a substantial determination estimation. And so that's one part of it, and it's related to this. So what we need to do is to look for properties that have been substantially damaged. More than 50% of the building has been damaged as a result of the flood. So it's 50% of the building value. If your building's worth $200,000, did you get more than $100,000 in damage? And so we needed to identify those buildings. Again, as I mentioned earlier, historic properties are exempt from a number of things, including this. So we were looking for things that didn't qualify as historic. They may be old, but if they're not on the historic register, they're not historic. So we had to look through the properties that were had water into their first floor. That's pretty much, if you got water in your basement, you're not substantially damaged. If you got water into your first floor, then you are potentially substantially damaged. So we had to go out and evaluate the 375 properties, and that's what we did. We went through, did a review, eliminated all the historic properties. Then we went to the remaining 100 properties that are not historic, and we had to do an evaluation of each and every one of those buildings. And we narrowed the list down, and we started working with folks. And these were the most heavily damaged folks. So we created a list. There were maybe 10 or so properties that fit that bill of substantially damaged. Now, what's important about substantially damaged is, according to NFIP, according to the way the flood rules work, is a substantially damaged building has two choices. You either must demolish your building or you must elevate the building. So I had to meet with a lot of people and have a lot of really hard conversations in what's left of people's living rooms, to go and tell them, these are the two choices that you have as a result of the position that you're in. So it's already really hard. I have no money to offer them. I only have to offer them, these are your choices that you have. So a lot of my time has been spent. We've created a small listserv, and I've been trying to give them weekly updates. We have expanded that list to include what we call significantly damaged buildings. So those are historic buildings that are very close by. So some State Street, Lower State Street. After Bailey, before you get to the cemetery, there's a group of about 8 buildings. The first one didn't get flooded. The second one got flooding in the basement. The rest of them got flooded. They may not all be substantially damaged, but many of them were. 1 or 2 of them are historic. It's not really fair to go and tell them, well, we're not talking to you because you're not substantially damaged. You're significantly damaged. So the historic property has the legal right to simply, other than elevating their furnace and electric panel, they could put everything back and move back. And that's their right. Everybody else doesn't have that right. So we've created listservs. We're doing a lot of outreach. We've started to get estimates because we really wanted to, as quickly as possible. These folks really need to figure out many of them are homeless. Or living with family. They're paired up, living with family. Most of them have founded places, but we really wanted to help them identify funding for them first. They were my priority, to try to find out how we can get them funding so we can get their buildings elevated, because all of them had flood insurance, but flood insurance only covers fixing the building. It doesn't cover elevating the building. So they needed, and we brought in Messier, and we brought in, well, actually only Messier has shown up to look at all these properties. He's given estimates for elevating. We met with Vermont Emergency Management. I met personally with the folks from Waterbury to learn as much as I could about building elevations. Lamoille County Planning Commission, I met with, talked with their senior planner as well, to try to learn as much as I could, because we really needed to find out about elevating buildings, because they really have 2 choices: buyouts or elevating buildings, and all of them want to keep their homes. And so my goal was to try to find out how we could get money to help them keep their homes. And the lessons that I learned from all of these places, from Waterbury and Lamoille County and from Vermont Emergency Management, is FEMA money is really designed to buy out properties. And once FEMA buys out a property, it is perpetually green space. You can't go back later and put new housing on it that's elevated. If FEMA buys it, it's perpetually green space. So, and the rules are really stacked against elevating buildings that are historic. And this is where a slight difference in definition of historic comes in, because under the federal rules, if it's older than 50 years, it's eligible. We don't, in our zoning rules, use eligible. We say if you're on the historic register, you're historic. If you're not on the historic register, you're not, because we want to have black and white rules. NFIP, FEMA has eligibility, so that means there's all these questions that come in. But once it's an older building, so for example, Waterbury had 10 properties that wanted to be elevated after Irene. In the end, only 1 building managed to get through the elevation process using federal money. And that 1 property was not historic, and that's why it got through. The other 9 could not get through, some of which were demolished, some of which were simply rebuilt and left right where they were. And we do know of at least 1 of them that reflooded again last month. So it's really disappointing. As a result of that, I put a lot of effort, working with Bill to go through and reach out to our legislative delegation. Federal money is not going to be how we help these folks unless it comes through an earmark or something like that. It's going to be extremely difficult. The FEMA money would be very difficult to use. Community development block grant money is extremely difficult to use in these situations. So really what we need is the state to step up and help reallocate some funds. And the numbers I've been trying to give to our legislative delegation at the state is that ballpark numbers is about $200,000 per house to elevate it. Might be a little more for some, a little less for others. And we have about 10 buildings. So we need between 1.5 and $2 million. And that would help save 18 units of housing. So that's what I'm trying to do, get $2 million to save let's for round numbers call it 1.8 million for 18 units. So it would be about $100,000 per unit to help these get elevated, to help homeowners keep their houses that they already own. Some of these are quadplex rentals. There's one quadplex rental. There's a duplex in there. There's a house which has an accessory apartment. So there are a number of a mix of units that are in there. It's not just State Street. We also have some on Elm Street that are also in that same area. We have a group of them that are in this category that really need assistance. So I've reached out to our delegation. They're going to try to get special funding for Montpelier to help these folks out. And our hope is to get this money so that way we could be able to get some elevations or some foundations poured, the buildings elevated and get some foundations poured. Then the homeowners can use their insurance checks to fix the buildings. We would only be paying to elevate the building. We don't know if this is going to work. I haven't been able to make, I can't make any promises. I don't make any promises because it's, it's up to the whim of a lot of other people, but that's where a majority of the effort has been going at this point, is to try to make sure we've got, make sure these most impacted people have been covered, that they have places to go. It's been really hard because, some of them have families with kids going to high school, and they're like, this is great. I mean, I can live over there, but with my parents or my brother or whatever, but how do I get my kid to keep going to high school, which is a couple of towns away? This doesn't work for people who have kids going to school in the next couple of weeks. So we've been really trying to work very hard to answer as many of their questions. Same questions some of you have. Can I fix my house and elevate it later? All those types of questions. Those are the questions we've been trying to work through with getting some contractors, getting some information, and really working to try to get these folks. And we're trying to expand the list, but most of what we're looking at from an area, if you're trying to understand what area we're looking at, the heaviest hit area in Montpelier was that area in State Street, all the way actually down to almost to the Creamy Stand. Toy Town, the last few buildings just had flooding in the basement. The old Toy Town Motel is probably the last of the heavily, significantly damaged buildings in that stretch. Elm Street from State to Spring, and Main Street from Berry to the roundabout. Those are all areas where we had water in the first floor. So those are the areas that we've been trying to categorize into two places. Are you significantly damaged? Are you substantially damaged? If you're substantially damaged, then we have to have a really hard conversation, and we've had all of those conversations. We're still reaching out to some of the substantially damaged to try to also find out. In some cases, they might sell their property to somebody else who might say, I'm willing to buy it and fix it. And so we're trying to really work with people to decide where they're at. We can't make the decision for them. If they want to pursue a buyout, they can pursue a buyout. If they want to pursue elevation, they can pursue elevation. If you're substantially damaged, though, you have to pick one or the other. And we're going to try to help homeowners, whichever they pick, we will help them accomplish it. And that's where most of my effort has been over the past couple of weeks, is really trying to focus on that group to try to get them as settled as we can. I certainly understand we haven't maybe been putting enough effort as well to the others. We put different damage into different buckets, and like business community, Montpelier Alive doing a great job. We'll let them take care of that bucket. We need to take care of the commercial property owners with flooding into the first floor. We haven't gotten there yet. And then we have this group, and then we've got the last group, which is the biggest group, which is a group of people who had the flooding in the basements and the other damage that is no less, which is no less difficult for them to deal with at their level. But we will be continuing to try to get more and more to grow our circle and get more information out. And we probably haven't been doing enough to get to that last group with all the information that that they need to get. We've been relying on Michelle working with the contractors to try to get as much of that information out, but I'll work with Evelyn to try to do a better job of rolling out more information to about the basements and how to deal with elevating the utilities and all those other pieces. But I know Bill wanted me to have a conversation, or at least mention what we've been doing about those groups of people, those 10 to 15 hardest hit people. And right now, I think our demolition list is relatively small. We've got Casella's looking at demolishing a building. We have 2 vacant buildings that were flooded that we're looking to demolish. But we don't have a lot. I don't know of any buyouts right now that are FEMA buyouts. But that may change over time as people learn more about their insurance and FEMA benefits decisions. So I'll leave it at that.
So Mike, you're talking to FEMA, and it sounds as though there's a push and pull with FEMA, where FEMA really resists the elevation, and their bias is really in favor of the buyout and demolish option. And do you get anywhere with them when you say, well, look, we already have a critical housing shortage in Montpelier, and the last thing we want to do is demolish buildings that are and could be providing homes for people?
Yeah, so I haven't been working directly with FEMA. What I've been working with is Vermont Emergency Management, and working with and talking with everybody else who has worked with FEMA and their experiences of working with FEMA. And Josh has been looking through the numbers and in the books, and it tends to track with what we've heard from other people, which is that by and large, the system, unless you're not, if you're a historic or eligible for historic, it's extremely difficult to elevate, and it's very hard to find examples of ones that have happened. And that was from Vermont Emergency Management saying that it's just really hard to go and get those. It's less from FEMA. But your example of losing and we're in a critical housing shortage, that is the message we are trying to give to the legislative committee. So when I talked about $100,000 to save a building and 1.8 million to save 18 units, when the state passes a budget and they go through and look at it, they are basically allocating about $400,000 to create one new housing unit. So, if you have 20 housing units, that's $8 million. And we're looking at, well, if we round it up to 20 housing units, we'd be talking about $2 million. So we can save 18 units for $2 million, or we could take $2 million of federal money, demolish those buildings, and then spend $8 million of state money to replace those units. And you can just look at it and say, this doesn't make any sense. But the way the state rules are working, the Housing and Conservation Board is not interested in helping us elevate. That's not what the program is for. They've got a program to build new housing units. Well, I mean, it doesn't make sense. So we reach out to ACCD. They give us kind of the same thing. This is where we're at. We don't have money that helps you do that. We have money to help you build new units. But I can save 4 times the number of units for the same amount of money. And so logic only gets you so far, but we have given this information, and the numbers are, the dollars and cents just make sense. And so I think our legislative delegation gets it, and they are going to be moving this forward. It does require, an act of the legislature to make a change to the money that was allocated. So either they need to change the rules for the money that was allocated, or they need to find new money to give to us to help in this situation. And so that's, it's in their hands right now to figure out how that's going to play out. That's between the legislature and the governor to sort out which route. And we hope, our hope is that we get something that falls in there, that gives us the ability to go and work with these, as we said, 8, 10 individual buildings to help them get elevated. But we're not just counting on them. We are exploring other options to go and see if maybe a partner like Down Street, a couple of these buildings are old. Maybe they would be interested in having their building demolished and sold to Down Street to get, if we can't get this money, maybe we can get new money by demolishing the building and then building a new building in its place, because we have money for new buildings. So, all right, we have to bulldoze the existing building to get money to build the new building. So we would be spending $400,000 to build the new building where the old building was. Again, the money doesn't make sense, but at the same time, it could help these folks stay where they are. So we continue to look at a lot of different options because we don't have all the answers yet, and there are a lot of programs out there. And I guess that is about the answer to the question, I guess.
Thanks, Mike. I think you've just given me the line for my tombstone. Logic only gets you so far. Any other comments or questions from members of the council? No, Donna.
It was really great to get that information. It's another one of those things at some point the public needs to know about. So think about how you can condense it.
Like we said, most of what we've been doing is it's been hard because we don't have answers. You don't want to tell half a story and just leave it there. We keep waiting to get that thing that says, now we know how we can help. So now we can tell the story that says, here's how it started, here was the middle, and here's how it ended. And we just keep hoping we can kind of get that. What's the end going to be? We know it's going to take some time, but let's hope we can find a happy ending to the story.
Lauren.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Really helpful to understand what you're doing and really important work. I'm wondering if our little lobbying committee might want to get together sooner rather than later. I can think of, a handful of ideas to try to push on some key legislators this seems like a no-brainer. The e-board could probably approve this. They redirected some money to go to flood relief efforts already. So we might be able to even make a pitch before the legislature reconvenes. So anyway, would be happy to strategize, and maybe our council lobbying committee could help you.
Great idea. I was just talking to our lobbyist last night and making plans to meet. So yeah.
Great.
Phil.
So I don't mean to cut Mike off. So I just want to go over quickly a couple of things. I want to talk just briefly about City Hall, just briefly about FEMA, but it was one thing I want to make sure that is clear for you. This is sort of in the public needs to know thing. I see Kurt is still on, but in the flood hours, we've talked a lot about what happened with the hub, what happened with communications, what happened with the police, fire, moving dispatch, and lost in that story, I think, was what DPW did and the way they protected. And I say this because I've known bits and pieces of this. And this morning we were sort of debriefing what went well and what didn't. Kurt, in his quiet way, just kind of outlined some of the things that had happened. And I was like, people need to know this. So I asked him to put together an outline, and I know Kurt is brief. So if you would indulge him, and I'm sure he doesn't even want to do this, but I really think DPW deserves to get recognized because a lot happened in those 24 to 48 hours that saved a lot of property. And I think people should know this. So with that, I'd like to have Kurt talk a little bit.
Okay. Thanks, Bill. Kurt Modica, Public Works Director. So yeah, this morning, like Bill said, we were sort of debriefing on flood items, and just wanted to point out for council and the public the work that our crews did to really sort of protect the infrastructure during the flood event. So just a few examples, of things that our staff did during the flood is Berlin Hill was washing out. The culvert at the bottom of Cedar Lane plugged during the flood, and staff brought equipment up there, restored the the hills really were sort of the focus of our staff during the flood event. In the downtown, things very quickly were getting underwater, and at that point, there's really not much we could do. But on the hilly sections of town, where water picks up a lot of velocity and becomes erosive, the pavement, like I said, on Berlin Hill, is actually starting to unravel. They were able to get up there, open that culvert up, and restore drainage. There are similar locations all over town. Hill Street was another example where the drainage systems were backing up. They were able to get there and save the pavement. As a just another note, before the event started, our street supervisor has a list of locations that are either systems set up to protect from flooding or are prone to backing up during flood events. So one of those is at the top of Taplin Street. The city years ago constructed sort of a small retention structure up there, made sure that was all clean. That was another area that even after the preemptively cleaning it before the flood, it did still catch debris, and we had to open that up again. Again, Taplin is one of the steeper streets in town, to protect that from getting damaged. So there's a lot of areas like that. The park where the frog pond is, in Hubbard Park. Again, a lot of drainage structures up there. The city actually did a pretty big project up there ahead of the flood. A lot of check dams, small retention structures that I think we really made a big difference in the damage to that neighborhood. So in addition to during the flood, I also just wanted to mention a few things that we did from the last flood event. Infrastructure upgrades that also helped the city during this event. Some major culverts that were replaced after Irene. There's one on Town Hill near Leapfrog Hollow that was upsized, that flooded out in Irene. No damage on that. The Berry Street culvert near Lane, reconstructed to withstand the 100-year flood after Irene. Again, no damage there. I actually had a request from a resident to inspect that about a month before Irene, and we met with the stream alteration engineer, and they had some recommendations just to kind of clean things up. We hadn't gotten to it yet, but regardless of that system completely held up very well. And then there was a number of other areas, Bliss Road, where we did a lot of culvert work. Out by Coda Chevrolet, there was a culvert replaced. That one didn't hold up perfectly, but it was because of an easement issue. We couldn't do all the work that we wanted to do there. So there's a lot of things done prior to the flood to protect infrastructure, and it was very successful, and a lot of things done during the flood by our staff that really helped minimize the damage in town. So just wanted a shout out for the crews of DPW that were out there all night long in the pouring rain. The Spring Street Bridge, we pulled debris out with a backhoe as it started to back up and build up against the side of the bridge. So they were doing heroic work out there, and just want to shout out to the staff that was really helping to protect the city.
This is great to hear, Kurt. Carrie.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm so glad you outlined all of that and explained all of that. I think I have heard people saying, where was the city in those first few days? And I'm like, there's an answer to that question. You just gave a lot of the answer. And it's easy for people to say, oh, look at all these problems that happened and how bad things were. And they don't necessarily know how much worse things would have been if you hadn't been doing all of that work that you were doing behind the scenes and without us knowing. And so thank you so much for doing that. It could have been so much worse. And I know that you all were tireless, literally out there slogging through the mud and doing that. And I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Donna.
Yes, and I'd like you to talk a little bit about the wastewater treatment plant. There was some work done out there.
Yes. So our chief operator, he actually volunteered to spend the night at the treatment plant because he was just concerned about maintaining the infrastructure there. So really, the wastewater plant was saved. So I guess first, post Irene, there was a lot of work done. We had some flooding there. It was actually flooded through a manhole on a pipe that goes to the river, on the treated wastewater that goes to the river, the effluent. It backed up through that, came up through a manhole in the facility and flooded the whole lower level. Post Irene, there's actually a submarine door installed to prevent flood water from entering the main admin building. And then during the last upgrade, we worked with planning to elevate all electrical equipment that we could to get our permit to do our work. And so all those areas were elevated. And this event, we actually did not get significant water into the facility. But what we did get is a massive amount of flow. The flow, I think, got up to 10 million gallons per day. Our average is about 1.8 million gallons. So I was in contact with Chris during the event, and at a certain point, we got scared that the disinfection system, which is ultraviolet lights that are in the channel as the water is kind of the last part of treatment. It disinfects the effluent as it leaves the plant. We made a decision to pull that equipment up out of the channels because the water was moving so fast that it was in danger of sort of dislodging the system from the racks that they hang from. The other thing that we did was pull the screen up out of the channel where the wastewater first comes into the plant. There's a trash screen where it sort of collects the garbage and everything. Again, because the flow is moving so fast, those treatment processes that are actually in the flow line are at risk of damage. And so by having staff there and moving those things out, we didn't sustain any damage on those. The damage that we did get, not really damage, but the impact to the plant was that all of the sort of sediment within the collection system washed down into the plant. And there's a series of settlement tanks as part of the treatment process. And those all got sort of filled up with silt. And immediately after the flood, that silt was sort of getting through the system, and all the pumps that moved the wastewater around were getting seized up full of silt. We had to keep pulling those apart and fixing them. And now we have to go through and clean all of those tanks, drain them all down one at a time. They're all redundant systems. So you drain one, clean it, drain the other one, clean it. So there's still a lot of work to do there. We've started on that process. But it was protected primarily through the elevation of the Dog River Road. The wastewater plant is like one of the lowest places in the city, but because the Dog River Road sits up so high along the river, it sort of creates a natural dam. And that's one of the projects Mike's looking at, is potentially even elevating that through a grant program in collaboration with the state to provide further protection from the plant, because the wastewater plant is our most expensive asset in the city. I think the value is somewhere close to $80 million. So it's very important to maintain that, and also obviously for the environment, it's critical to maintain operations there.
Kurt, correct me if I get details of this wrong, but one of the other things, for those that aren't aware, the wastewater plant is a biological process. It has, the bacteria, the bugs, they call them, that actually eat the germs and things. And am I right? The bugs got washed out, right?
Yeah, that's right. I forgot about that piece. Right, again, because of the high flows, there's bacteria treatment in the aeration tanks that have air sort of to give oxygen to the bugs. Those wash right out of the plant, and the next day, and that does impact the treatment process because the bugs eat the organics, the food and the waste. So we got a hold of South Burlington, I believe it was South Burlington, and they the next day we trucked in 3 loads of bugs and we're back up and running. So it was a very quick turnaround. Thank you, Bill. I forgot about that piece.
I like the whole idea of trucking in the bugs. I just thought was great. So thanks. We have South Burlington's bugs in our tanks now. So we appreciate it. They also came, by the way, and sent a sweeper or two the day after the flood. So we had City of South Burlington vehicles and employees down here helping us clean up. So I thanks for that. I really wanted people to understand that, because I think there's a little bit of an untold story. And I think the other untold story perhaps is the whole story of the hub. You know, again, to the point of what was the city doing, that the hub was staffed by the Parks Department. That was really 100% a city operation, led by a volunteer, Peter Walk, and certainly assisted very ably by Montpelier Alive. And we, our emergency team, the mayor, Montpelier Alive, those folks, we were meeting there every day at 11. That was our coordinating point for what people needed. And we were, you know, they would tell us, we'd call the state EOC to get supplies. But, you know, I'm not trying to take any credit away from Montpelier Alive, but it's really important that was pre-planned before the flood, that we would work with them on volunteers. We'd already lined up the Parks Department, and they brought in the entire Parks Department. Another key piece about this is the MYCC people that people saw running around. Those are summer employees of the city, so they aren't just volunteers. And we had one person complain that the city hadn't done anything at all to help them. And in fact, the day after the flood, city employees were actually cleaning out their basement, these MYCC people. So it was just kind of, you know, and I think that's fine. It says MYCC, it doesn't say City of Montpelier. I get it, but I think people just don't realize everything the city was doing. Michelle out inspecting all the buildings, the police, everything DPW did. I'm really proud of our team, that's for sure. And then the rest of our group was moving the whole city hall operation over to the senior center. So that was going on. About city, so let's talk a little bit quickly about FEMA, just moving on. We met with, we had our first call with them in terms of not just helping, not the parts that you've all heard about, the aid to people, but just our own processing for the city's operations. And we're meeting with them, I think on Monday or Tuesday, to fill out all our forms, kind of go over and make sure they have all our information. So they take every bit of our damages and then they turn them all into individual projects. So for example, after the May 2011 flood, I think we had 75 individual FEMA projects. So just fixing a drain, fixing a street, they'll get listed that way. So we will be sorting all of those out. And then next Thursday, we're meeting for fairly substantial time to go through all the work. So then we'll get a sense of exactly what's covered, what we can do, and when we can start. And we're expecting after, and so questions we're going to be asking. We believe that a FEMA recovery officer is covered by FEMA, flood recovery officers are covered by, to some extent, by FEMA funding. So we want to confirm that so we can bring somebody on to do that work to kind of help us navigate the whole FEMA thing. And I was actually, as I was listening to Mike talk, it may be that, you know, that's the kind of person that could help outreach to some, you know, some of these buildings and provide some of that assistance and knowledge. We'll have to see. And then obviously we're going to get going on our city hall project. So once we get the go ahead, we're going to release an RFP to get architectural services to help us start planning for what goes where and all of that. And like everyone else, we'll be elevating our utilities probably to the back of what was the council chambers and looking at how to renovate the basement into different configurations. So that is really the single biggest project we have. There is some work to be done at the fire station and some work to be done at the police station and a few other smaller project pump stations like that. But our single biggest recovery project is City Hall. So those are the things that the city staff is working on. One final thing I have on this list for me, and certainly plenty more for you, is city committees. We have a lot of city committees, and obviously it's important that they keep doing work, but they are also staffed, and many of our staff are pretty tapped out. So I think one of our questions was, you know, how you all feel if some of them get suspended or not, or if you have any thoughts about that, or if I mean, I think it's important to provide staff support for most committees. Maybe we give them the choice, but wanted to at least raise the issue because I didn't feel comfortable single-handedly just saying no more committee work or whatever. So there are committees, your committees, to do work on your behalf. So just wanted to toss that up for conversation.
I think I'll start by saying I think that the city staffing for those committees is very important because in years past, I think some of our committees were laxer than we should have been at stuff like getting the agendas posted and the minutes posted and all those things. All those city committees are subject to the Open Meetings Act and Public Records Act. So all that stuff has to be done. And that's something that volunteers really can't be expected to do. So so I think it's an important function. And I think that it's fine to let some of that not happen while city employees are doing other work. Donna, did you have your hand up, and then Tim?
I did. Just a little different point of view. Maybe you were saying the same thing, Jack, is that during the pandemic, committees also had staff have to do other things. One, we were so short of people because of everyone we had put on furlough. But I think that it's not the staff that's doing the minutes. It's not the city staff that's doing the posting. And our committees have matured a lot with the records request and open meeting law. And if they run into a snag, they should be able to go to somebody. But I think we should just have the staff talk to each committee and see how maybe this touch base once a quarter or something, just to, keep them on track might be helpful. But I think we have to face reality. They just don't have enough time.
Tim?
My reaction was just still being relatively new at this is how many committees we have. It's a really large number. Do we have like an executive committee, Jack, that maybe could review if we have some key critical committees we want to staff that we need to staff to keep going? We could do that, and then maybe some of the committees that aren't as active or not as critical could take a break.
We don't have an executive committee, but it's true. We have a lot of committees, and that means we have a lot of staff time doing it. And Bill and I didn't think about this before tonight's meeting, but we could come up with a list of all the committees because we had it, because we go through every year and make appointments to the committees. So then that might be a good start. Helen?
Yeah, thank you. I understand it's a kind of emergency, right? We have to put all our resources for recovery. But at the same time, we should decide if this suspension, or let me say getting rid of the committees, is a permanent or temporary one.
We're only talking about temporary,
Temporary. Okay. If it is temporary, then if we can tell committee chairs how long, we are planning to have this model, then probably they will find a way to do what they are doing by themselves. If they say, oh no, we can't, then for a temporary time, they don't have their meetings. But I think it is important to have these committees. Maybe some of them are not functioning, better than us, but it's a way of public engaging with the city, and it is important.
Lauren?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I generally agree with the approach of, putting it on the chairs and to the committees, like letting them know, short staffing, here's the responsibilities, are you either take a break for some set amount of time, even like revisit in a couple months. The only caveat I'm thinking about is, out of this huge public process that we've been going through, there were a lot of like projects and initiatives identified that could be things that these committees could be like ripe entities for picking up and moving forward some community priorities. So that might change somewhat, like a committee that's maybe been a little quieter lately might actually have this like new energy to it. So we might want to, maybe we staff strategically where there's something that there's like a really active, that is kind of a emergency response initiative where we can actually get the benefit of these volunteers that have already raised their hand for the community. So that might be the only caveat I'd put in, is if it's like really meeting a kind of urgent, timely city need, then putting the staffing in those places as opposed to across the board.
And Carrie?
Yeah, I think it's reasonable for some committees maybe to take a little break of a certain amount of time, but I'm reluctant to say that committees should just. I mean, I guess I'm sort of sensing this idea that the committee's work is not seen as particularly important and it's expendable, and so if we have to prioritize what we're going to do, then let's drop off the committees. And if that's true about any committees, then separate from what's going on with the flood, we need to look at that. So if the city council decides to create a committee, I think it's because we thought it was important work that needed to be done, regardless of what else is going on in the city. And if we have too many committees and we're stretched too thin, then we should really kind of look at that. And I'm definitely open to that idea. But I think each individual committee should be thinking about, do we need to keep meeting right now? Can we take a break? Can we meet less often? What, how does our work fit into the overall priorities of the city? But to just kind of say a blanket, oh, staff is too busy for committees, kind of gives me this sense that committees are being viewed as like extra work on top of the real work that the staff has to do. And if that's really the case, then that's a bigger underlying issue that we need to address.
So I just want to say, I appreciate that comment and no, that isn't the case, but keep going.
Okay, good. I'm glad to hear that. So the committees that I'm on, there is one of them where we're definitely getting the message from the staff that we shouldn't meet at all anymore because it's just too much, it's not necessary and it's too much work and we shouldn't do it. There's another one where it feels like it's kind of fallen down on the staff's priority list. And then there's another one that is the opposite, all of that. That's just, going great guns. And so I don't know if that depends on the staff member who's assigned to it or what, but I guess I think I would turn it back to the chairs of the committees and say, okay, recognizing that staff is very taxed right now, is there work that you can continue to do without staff, or maybe with the very minimum input of staff to just, make sure that meetings are warned and that kind of stuff? Or maybe you can talk to your staff person and not meet for the next month or the next 2 months or something like that. But I don't think that we as city council can say anything about what all committees should do.
Fair enough. I appreciate that. And actually this feedback is helpful for me to address the concerns that have been raised. And I think you're right, Carrie, that different staff are carrying different loads in the flood response. And so some I think are feeling really overwhelmed because of the particular roles they have. And so they may be not, whereas other people, committee work is policy work, and we're here to support that. And so that's, that is your work, and that's what we're here for. So I'll wait to hear from Donna, but I think my approach after this conversation is just to go back, look at the committees, talk to the individual staff members, and if there's one or two instances, and try to work with that with the chair, or come back and report to you all. But I appreciate what you're all saying.
And Donna.
I guess I've been on a lot of committees without a staff, and not every committee has a staff assigned to it, and totally functional. And when you need a resource or you need their expertise, you call them in. So many committees do not depend on staff. And I think we can get by. We got by during the pandemic without as much staff support for some of the committees, sheer because of time. So I think our committees are so full of competent people. I just feel they can function very well. It's not to take away their value at all. In fact, it's putting more value and more responsibility, it's true. But I think by and large, they can handle it. But it always comes down to the conversation with the committee chair and the committee itself, with the staff that's now working with them.
Great. There you
Thank
go,
you.
Bill.
Thank you for that feedback. So that's basically my list about flood, unless there's anything else anybody else wants to talk about. It's just kind of all flood all the time.
Yeah, we're gonna have a lot of other stuff to talk about. I don't think we need to say it all tonight because
Right.
we will be saying it night after night after night.
Right.
I don't want to cut anyone off though if they have anything that really is, yeah, Donna. Oh, you're muted now. Sorry, Donna, you're still muted.
My comment, I thought you were like closing the meeting, but I'll save mine for my council report.
Oh, yeah, I wasn't closing the meeting. Okay.
Okay.
But that does bring us to council reports. So let's start with you.
Luckily, all my committees took August off. But really, the community meetings have been great. I do wish people had more information. It seems we've done a lot of things. I was telling Bill, the city's got to brag more about the things they have done in the infrastructure because the public generally does not know. And when we have this newsletter, it's a great communication, but it also needs to be a way to tell people what we're doing in maybe a little more detail to keep putting in front of the work that the staff has done and constantly does. But my comment was, I really do. Here we are, 9:31 and no break. And I feel it's not fair that I have to miss the discussion because I have a limited bladder that you all don't have. And so I really feel we need to go back and say at 8:30, 8:15, we take a break. It's humane, people. It's humane. Okay, that's all I want to say. Thank you.
You're right. You're right. I should have listened. I was wrong. Yeah. Carrie.
Thanks. Yeah, I just want to say that I'm sort of personally still immersed in so much of the flood recovery process, but that I also know that many of my neighbors and many of the other people in my district are experiencing similar things to what I'm going through. And so I am very interested in hearing from folks about what their experiences are and what kind of resources they need and what kind of just in general needs they have that are not being met. And I'm going to hopefully be trying to do some of my own research and reaching out to people to find that out, but I also would encourage people to reach out to me and share that with me, and so that we can have a stronger voice about what is needed for support going forward.
Thanks, Carrie. Sal.
I will echo what Donna said about the city doing a little more bragging. You know, it was great today to hear detail on what I knew was happening. I knew things were happening behind the scenes. I didn't know the scale of it. I didn't know the detail. And I heard a lot of folks around town talking about how the city just didn't show up. And it's just, I mean, it's great to have this now, so I can sort of, you know, with some authority, answer those questions. But we really need to tell a better story. And you know, Evelyn's been doing a great job. I just think we need to get as much information about the kind of planning that we did, the things that you know were on the checklist that got done only because they were on the checklist. It would have been so much worse, as many of us have said earlier tonight, had the city not been active and proactive about it. But so many people in town just don't think of it that way. That's not what they see. They see Montpelier Alive, who did a marvelous job, but they were in the forefront, and the city really took a back seat. And I understand that, you know, humility can pay off, but in this case, I really think we need to blow our horn a little bit more.
Yeah.
But certainly thanks for all that effort. And it's still, you know, it's still ongoing, and people still don't know.
Great.
So
You'll see if you get your bridge today, my article
good.
is about some of that, as much as I could fit in. I mean, you know, it's a simple little thing, but it was Montpelier Alive gave us the tents, so all the tents said Montpelier Alive, and I think so. It's just one of the, we don't have tents, so we appreciate it. And Katie was certainly there and working with. They are essentially one person, and she knocked herself out, but so did the city folks, and it's just, again, I want to be really careful that we're not trying to in any way take anything away from Montpelier Live when we talk about this, but I do think that it is also fair to say that what happened at the hub would not have happened without the city.
Well, it was a real partnership, and I think if we present it that way, people understand it that way. Right now, a lot of people don't consider it that. Maybe we need hats or T-shirts or something. I don't know.
Tim.
Thanks. So yeah, kind of feels like I'll flood all the time, so I want to talk about something else. But it seems like, so this evening we set the property tax rate for this coming year, which it was really significant because that followed a really an integrated, extensive citywide reappraisal of all the properties in town. And that's going to impact a lot of people in different ways, but all financially. We know that the tax year that just ended June 30th, we have a deficit. Hopefully we'll know what the amount of that deficit by our next meeting. And then that's followed by this whole flood, which we know we have significant costs coming at us, but we have no idea what they are and how much FEMA will cover. Sounds like we may have a sense of that by the end of September. We're really looking at all this with really significant increases in expenses and revenues in this current year's budget now, which didn't contemplate the flood stuff at all because they couldn't. It's just feeling like we have a perfect kind of financial storm brewing, and I'm really nervous about that. And trying to take a cue from Kurt in Public Works, I think what it really is incumbent on us as a council that we need to commit and gather and establish some priorities to start guiding this process, because the budget season is going to be here immediately, and we have not had those conversations. So I hope we can all commit to doing this to help get through it. Thanks.
Thanks, Tim. Palin.
Yeah, again, I want to thank everyone, all the city staff, all the great work you have done and you are still doing. And I understand, again, this is recovery time, it's emergency, so we have to use our resources in a more functional way, but also having our routines is very important too, and public needs that too. So yeah, let's talk about how we can recover. Let's talk about how we can have better responses next time. I hope it doesn't happen, but it might, right? But there are so many things that are happening in addition to flood recovery in our community. So we shouldn't forget those things too, like senior center. There are so many things that are happening. Members are not happy. We have to support them to homelessness, right? I can list so many things, but I will just stop there. So I don't know what the plan is. Maybe we can come up something that, okay, some staff will work on the recovery, but some of them can also just continue the routine work. So people feel that, okay, this is our community, right? At least we are going back normal, faster than we imagine. So it will give, I think, great comfort and security feeling to the public. Thank you.
Thanks, Palin. Lauren.
Hi, thanks, and apologies, I had to step away. Are we just doing council reports?
Yes. We're at council reports.
I had a family issue for a moment. Thank you. Yeah, no, I mean, gratitude. Like, it was really helpful to get this level of detail tonight from the city staff, as you all have said. And I think just continuing to tell these stories, and sounds like on a great track for the capturing lessons learned and some of the ideas about how we create checklists and things that are going to make it, even better next time. So just gratitude to the city staff and gratitude to the community who keeps showing up in big ways for looking at the future, both kind of immediate response and, visioning what kind of community we want to be, even as we all deal with the very depressing reality as we still see our devastated community. So I think it's, it's both a really tragic time and a time for opportunity. So I'm just grateful so many people are showing up for those conversations. So that's it for me tonight. Thanks.
Thanks, Lauren. Mayor's report, I just have a couple of things. One, I said this when I first went on the council 5 years ago, that we had these tours of all the departments, and I was just endlessly impressed by the commitment and the dedication and the professionalism of the people that run and staff all of our city departments, and what they do every day to serve our community. And I continue to, when we see a crisis like what has hit us this year, it just makes it that much more obvious that the quality of life that we get from in this city depends in large part on what the great work that our city employees do. And I really praise all of them for what they do. I was going to these down at the hub. I was going to these meetings every day at 11 o'clock with Bill and Kelly and other departments heads, and all these things came up, and I never heard a city employee say, no, we can't manage that. No, we can't do this. Whatever it was a constant commitment to do whatever needed to be done to meet the needs of the city. The other thing that I just wanted to mention is that we've been doing these meetings remotely, and we can certainly have effective meetings remotely, but I feel from our experience at this time and our experience during the COVID time that there's great value to also being able to meet in person if we can do it. And so I had this idea today, and I looked at the school board schedule, and it turns out that the school board has their meetings not on the same nights as we have our meetings. And so it made me think, well, maybe we could talk to them and see if we could have our meetings temporarily at the high school on nights that they're not having their meetings. And so I'm just curious if you all think that that's something we would like to explore, because I think there's a real value to doing it. Thumbs up, thumbs down. Great. Okay, well, Bill and I were talking about that today, and we will pursue that. And that's all I've got. Next up, city clerk's report.
I'll pass.
And city manager's report. Is there anything you haven't already said?
Yes, I do. Things that are not flood related, and actually they tie into some of the perfectly timed comments during council report. So just first of all, high school, just for those that don't realize, we have done that before. In fact, the last time the elevator went out of service and we were out for several months, we met regularly at the high school and obviously worked with them. And the nice part is they also have the tech set up in the library. It's handicapped accessible. So assuming they'll have us. So the reason we didn't do that immediately after the flood was that they were closed too. They got flooded, and so they weren't letting people in. So it wasn't an option for us. And so when the mayor mentioned it, we'll be happy to follow up with them. School's opening, so there shouldn't be any issues with, that kind of thing. So that's good. The plan is, as per what some of you have said, is starting at our next meeting to get back to some of our backlog of business that has, we've necessarily set aside. I'm sure we can keep a flood update item on the agenda, but for example, we'd actually for tonight had planned to have the council workshop about the Country Club Road project. Remember that? And so that we don't completely forget that, our plan is to have that at the next meeting. We've got a couple of other items that have been getting pushed off. So try to get back to normal so you can expect some more normal meetings. And I think to, again, the point that a couple of you made, and I think Tim in particular, are September 27th meeting, the second meeting, is supposed to be our strategic planning meeting. So that is, and I think, probably was already going to be interesting with 3 new people and new mayor and all this stuff. And now we have this huge, huge flood. So I think getting our priorities in order, agreed upon, laid out our work plan, and dealing with some of our issues will be really important. Working on getting a facilitator for that meeting, just so we can have, the mayor and I or whoever don't have to manage the meeting. We can all participate and do that. And that's worked well in the past. And then the following meeting would have actually been the follow-up strategic planning meeting, and then actually, correctly speaking, starting to talk about budget preview. So it's timely that we get back to that, and particularly under the circumstances, we really need to sort out all our pieces and see where we're at. So just laying the groundwork that we too are of the same mind as you, that so that's where we're going. That's all I had. Yeah, that was all I had.
Okay, I think we are set then, and we can be in adjournment at 9:46 p.m. Thank you all.
Thank you.
See you next time.
Thanks.
Maybe